Live from across the divided states of America, it is now time for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more from across the disunited states of this country and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning again, everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful morning. First up in the headlines in COVID news, more than 340,088 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with just under 700 new deaths. I believe it was 691 new deaths. Over the past week, there has been an average of 38,135 cases per day. That's a decrease of 29% from the average 2 weeks ago. 35% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 46% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 32,806,600 people across the United States and killed about 582,362 people. More than 250,000 people have been confirmed to have died from the coronavirus in India. Upwards of 250,000 total deaths there. Just seen upwards of 348,000 cases and a record 4,200 deaths as of today, their time. A variant of the virus first detected in India, B1617, has been spreading and has now been found in 49 countries. It was upgraded on Monday to a variant of concern by the WHO, the World Health Organization, for its ability to spread more quickly and potential resistance to antibodies generated by your body to protect against diseases like this one. Britain's economy has contracted 1.5% over the past year compared to the previous quarter, with a return to growth this March with 2.1% growth. In national political news here in the States, some gas pumps are running dry in the southeast United States, with 16% of stations empty in South Carolina and about 1 in every 10 empty in Georgia and Florida. This coming after the Colonial Pipeline was shut down after reportedly being the subject of a ransomware cyber attack. Robert Long, the murderer, the anti-Asian / anti-sex worker hate crime murderer who back in mid-March went on a rampage before being arrested for killing all of those women, is now being charged, including with murder charges and hate crimes in Fulton County, Georgia.
Good.
And if the district attorney said that she is looking for the death penalty, this would be the first test of new hate crime legislature passed by Georgia's legislature. And it seems from the death penalty that it has some teeth. Anyway, Pennsylvania's Attorney General has warned against ghost guns, with Republican Senator Ted Cruz saying that ghost guns are actually a non-issue, with Democrats really just wanting to, quote, trace every gun in America, end quote. That's according to Ted Cruz. Ghost guns, by the way, are guns effectively that you can either print at home or order online that are not complete guns, that don't have any kind of serial license number, anything that can be tracked. So it's a sort of effectively a trackless gun, a gun that you can't track easily online. Anyway, then you combine those up with other parts of a gun that you have to buy in other ways, and you get a fully working gun. It's sort of like a 95% gun, something like that. Anyway, in international news, military bombardments by Israel against Palestinians and by Hamas against Israelis has continued. Those bombardments have grown to their heaviest levels in recent years. At least 35 Palestinians and 6 people in Israel have died since Monday. In related news, Israel's police commissioner says there's been an unprecedented level of violence between Israeli Arabs and Israelis in the country, with the action in some cities resembling a civil war, he said. Groups protesting for and against both the Israelis and the Palestinians have been taking to the streets in recent days, not only in Israel, but in the United States and other countries. Pakistan, meanwhile, has called on Muslim nations to condemn Israel's actions and stand by the Palestinians, where Qatar and Egypt say they are working on a possible ceasefire in the conflict. A survey conducted by an American business group shows that upwards of 40% of those living in Hong Kong are thinking of moving from the region, with 62% of those moving saying they're citing concerns about the new national security law and the influence of Beijing in the region. In tech news, Airbus, the plane company, will have to stand trial for manslaughter for a crash 12 years ago that killed 228 people. In Earth and Science news, the Voyager 1 satellite is reporting a faint, unidentified humming sound from the interstellar medium. The interstellar medium, by the way, is the largely vacuous zone between various solar systems and black holes and other, cosmic phenomena, effectively. It's sort of like this largely empty medium of radiation and trace amounts of matter. And again, the Voyager 1 satellite, which is currently in its early stages after leaving the heliosphere, the region around our sun, it is now traveling through that interstellar medium and again reporting a strange faint humming sound, which I'm sure is not space whales. But we need to close this out. Those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And there we go. And we're out. With a whimper rather than a bang. Jamarl, you're familiar with space whales, right? Are you familiar with this trope?
Totally familiar with space whales.
So you can confirm the new humming sound is not coming from them.
I was about to say, well, I'm not certain that it's not coming from space whales, but who knows? Who knows what's out there? No, that's interesting though. I mean, that is, something in the vacuum of space, and there's an anomalous sound coming from the vacuum of space. That's great. I think, honestly, science is most interesting not when it knows something, it's when it doesn't know something. Like, that's why the UFO thing is so interesting, honestly. Like, they would have to invent either new physics or new understanding of that physics in order to explain it. And that's mind-blowing. And, like, even the sounds in space and stuff, like, what is that? Are they going to find that, hey, there's this kind of just odd phenomena that produces a sound at this particular... All of that stuff is fair game. I mean, like, if you're thinking about Star Trek only uncovered, like, 0.4% of space or something like that. It's, like, not even in our galaxy. Like, the overwhelming majority of it is still unexplored. So, like, even on that show with that godlike technology, still unexplored. And so it's like, for us, everything is a mystery. Like, all of that stuff is shocking. And we may uncover that, hey, quantum mechanics or gravity works under certain conditions in certain ways, and that our equations of that stuff is right in a local sense, but maybe not necessarily in a galactic sense. Like, we were having a conversation about the dark matter, and whether or not dark matter is a real thing, or whether or not dark matter is some kind of anomaly in the experimentation that produces a particular result. But, the beauty of science, as opposed to religion, you talk about Jesus, well, that's the same story that's taken place for hundreds and hundreds of years. Science gets to the point where saying, hey, we don't understand that. And they may complain, they may argue. There's going to be this human element of stick-to-itiveness, of not wanting to budge. I'm not going to budge from this point. By the same token, though, they will be moved as new experiments come out. And there's more people saying, hey, I think that's wrong. Hey, I think that's not right. So you may get something like Newtonian mechanics that seems like it's just the way it is. And then you get Einstein saying, well, wait a minute, this stuff is relative. And it's like, how could it be relative? We don't see it as being relative. I mean, if you look at this, we never see these things. We never see space contract. We never see time expand. And then you get more advanced technology, and you get airplanes flying in the sky, and you're like, well, wait a minute, our satellites are off. Or wait a minute, our airplanes are off. And you realize the relativistic equations that took place decades ago explain the phenomena that you're seeing with the airplanes, meaning once you take relativistic equations into account, well, all of a sudden the values are right, because that airplane is higher than you, or that satellite is higher than you, as opposed to us that's in the gravity wells, or the minor or minute, but you see the changes, even in time. In
terms of time tracking.
Yeah.
Specifically, when you're talking about relativity, of
right.
course, that whole time dilation.
That's right.
The idea of it. And we're going
it's
into this
weird.
tangent, but I will go with you there. It is weird. And what you're looking at specifically with relativity is like the measures that you use, the various, if you think of a compass or a ruler, just the measures that you're using to get orientation, correct, and
depending on how fast you're going or how
exactly
much gravity,
these things. It's weird. Have you ever read American Gods, the Neil Gaiman novel? Or have you ever? It made it into a TV show a while back. But there's this idea, and I'm not going to plot spoil, but there's sort of this idea that there are like local pantheons where different gods have different levels of belief in different areas. And in some sense, they continue to exist because they're believed in those areas. I'm not making that the case, but you brought up
But it's like as they get weaker because people stop believing in them, that type of stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Which, if you think about it, is to our monotheism what you're saying would be to a single physical theory. If you have different laws, or at least if the laws of our universe express themselves in different ways, depending on where you are, radically enough that they don't seem like the same laws, that things seem like they might break down at some point when you're looking at a weird set of phenomena.
Quantum mechanics.
Exactly. Yeah. That either suggests that there is a deeper order that we need to work hard to discover, or just that it's a little bit more chaotic than we thought, and there actually are overlapping sets of laws that apply in some other cases. Yeah. It seems like a grand unified theory is possible. Saying this as a complete layperson, it would make intuitive sense that you can get some way of explaining everything. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe just things are weird in some places and they get unpredictable.
I think the belief is that there is a grand unified theory, that there is some kind of deep the way in which the equations, because if you look at the equations, like the gravity equations, or if you look at the magnetism, those equations look very similar. And oftentimes you have these things that are kind of like interplay with one another, where one equation turns into something else later on. Like there does seem to be a deeper unity or deeper harmony in regards to the way that stuff works. Now the question becomes, quantum mechanics, something tiny, these microscopic levels where it doesn't seem that anything is there, or things are popping into existence or popping out of existence. These virtual particles and everything else is like something coming out of nothing. And then the question is, well, really, is it really coming out of nothing? Like what's the foam and all this other? It's very bizarre.
It is bizarre. Where do you fall in the whole multiverse, single verse thing?
I don't know. I mean, it depends on what this is, right? Like if this is, we believe that this is solid because we think for us it is solid. But what if it's not as solid as we think it is? What if it really is as easy as just an energy conversion that from our standpoint is solid, but from whatever that makes this up, it's just a different file in a computer system or something like that. And I'm using computer just because that's, we always explain this stuff at the level of the technology that we reach at. And so it's like, what if it is not as energy as intensive as we think? Like it's energy intensive for us, but for something that's above us, it's hitting a button. Like it can be very straightforward. Like we always imagine God is, that our value is somehow enshrined just because there's God. What if God is, a slacker? We have just the computer programmer sitting in his basement that just made a petri dish, and you're worshiping this guy, and this guy, don't even support his kids. Like, who knows? I guess I'm making the point that says I'm not sure. Like, it depends on the energy. It's possible. I mean, but that depends on what we are. If you know what I mean? Like, it depends on the point of this. If there's a point where it's like, yeah, your goal is to evolve, then yeah, you may have the multiple verses. You may have something where you can live multiple lifetimes at once. You wouldn't even necessarily know it because you're being partitioned out.
What a screwed up point that would be. I want you to evolve. Yeah, think about what that means for a second. Not only is that kind of a slap in the face because that would be God saying to you, I want you to change.
Yes.
I want all of you to become something completely different. I'm ashamed of what I made, and I want you to grow out of it.
I want you to be better than what you are.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. But then it also throws you into the pit of nature, red in tooth and claw, where you're just competing with and killing and cannibalizing life itself, eating other creatures to make yourself evolve in some way.
But you're assuming that it's all in the way that you think it is. Like for example, what if it's a schoolroom? For example, let's say you lived in an advanced technological society, very advanced. And in that society, you have kids. Well, those kids are still kids. And those kids are going to float and say, I'm going to rebel against the society and I want to burn stuff down. And the society can be, there's no poverty or anything else. And it's like, this society isn't right. That person is always going to be there. That group is always going to be there. You're always going to have the guy that says, I'm uncomfortable with that group over there, that race. Or I'm uncomfortable with. What happens, though, if you have the technological capability of dropping that person into every race, into every sex, into various periods? And when that person gets to a point where they graduate, they live through all of these experiences. And so it's not like, I think that person may be racist. Well, no, that person lived the life of a black person multiple times. In fact, more than you have. Like, it's that stuff. Like, if it's that, where the goal is to get the person up to a person level where they can function in society the way that they don't wreck society.
If that's how it would work,
that will make sense to me.
Maybe, but you could go the other direction too. Instead of technology allowing for something grandly unifying, like bringing everybody up through a sort of common frame of reference.
It can be exploitive.
Wherever you end up, you've been through quite a bit of it. You've gotten through the school of hard knocks in terms of the possibilities of life, so to speak. Instead of that idea, it could be just that as if there is a they, that we. Or whatever entity, whatever intelligent agency we're talking about, could be God that you're talking about here, abstract conversation, they could want to speciate us. We could want to become very different from each other. Instead of all getting a common sense of understanding, instead of going through the humanistic experience, we could decide to evolve each in our own little direction. You could end up with subspecies of human beings living in different parts of the solar system, different parts of the universe. And on the individual level, with the possibility of such a heavily virtualized reality. You think about where the internet is now, where VR are now.
So where that goes.
Where does that go? You could have completely custom universes that, you know, any individual person chooses to spend most of their time in, simply because it's an escape valve from reality and they're able to get into it. So what you presented as a unifying experience could be a dramatically diversifying experience where everybody's just doing their own thing in their own VR headset in their own corner of the internet in 3030 or whatever. Or you could have some weird combination of both. Technology opens up these weird involutions of possibility.
It does.
We don't know where they're going to take us.
And by the way, it could be that way right now. Like, there's no reason to believe that other people are here.
Yeah.
We just assume it. Little. I could be hurt. I could be injured by those other people. And so I could just kind of have to assume that this environment is real and everything else. But you're right.
Little dash of solipsism.
Yeah. You could have your own little world. Yeah. Like, you could be in your own little space, evolving in the own way that you want to evolve. It's like, this guy is an uber capitalist. Great. Let's play that out. Let's see how that goes. And let's see, are you okay with the world and the way that world is? I mean, think of the way we are. We change. We evolve based on our environment. We get better. Sometimes we get worse. Sometimes a person gets ill and evolves beyond it. Sometimes a person gets worse. You know, it's like, I can't be around that person. The person's a horrible person. Well, sometimes those environmental situations change us. And look, I would rather it be in a virtual space where you can kind of play that out, and as opposed to having real, let's say, beings on the other end of some of those poor choices. Because we make poor choices. Like, we don't know any better. Like, if I was raised, if I was Donald Trump's kid, how would I behave as opposed to now? And with my experiences of having just uber wealth granted to me, gifted to me with a dad that behaves that way, clearly I wouldn't be who I am now. Everything else could be true, with the exception of just that. And I would be a radically different person. Like, how do you evolve out of that? And if you're looking at this notion from the standpoint of God, and you create something like that, are you really going to hold that being in perpetuity responsible for eternity?
Well, wait. Suddenly we're holding God responsible. I thought God held us responsible, Jamarl.
Well, yeah, I do hold God responsible for a lot of stuff. But you get my point. Like, if you're like under the two models, one model is, okay, this person is going to grow and evolve, and we're going to recognize just in real terms that people make mistakes, people do bad things, people make certain choices and everything else based on putting away. Like, that's an honest recognition of stuff, as opposed to, okay, God created this thing and now he's going to torture it forever. That seems worse to me.
I hear you. Well, I've also we're over on headlines, but I'm going to keep talking for a second. There's this a conversation about theodicy where you can read Voltaire's Candide or just different books. How is it that God could create this universe? This universe has a lot of problems in it. You look around at humanity and the state of humanity, and you think to yourself, if some omnipotent, omniscient being were to set us all anew and create something truly beautiful, would they create this? And then I heard this theory, which is maybe God, assuming that there is one for a second, created all good, great, perfect universes. Yeah. They got that out of the way. They've done it. They're wrapped up with a bow tie. And then they decided to step it down to the slightly less than perfect universes. And they kept doing it until they made this one.
Until they got here.
And exactly. It's just expanding the possibility space of reality, which could explain why we live here, if you believe in God.
But why does a person sit down and play a game of chess for 6 hours? It's arduous.
Maybe a compulsion.
It could be a compulsion. It could be an addiction.
Some of that in there.
But even within the context of that compulsion or addiction, it's still happiness. Like it's like in that level of work, that level of effort. I mean, whether that's from imposing your will upon another individual, it's like, I'm so powerful in this moment. I just feel phenomenal. And you just get your jollies off on that. Whether it's the skill that's being displayed in the moment where it's just the good thing of combat. Whatever that is, that's still that individual in that particular moment experienced a certain degree of happiness, a pure, momentesimal moment of happiness. And in doing so, is it possible that just the act itself is the thing? Meaning, like, the climbing of the mountain in and of itself is like, oh, this is horrible, it's cold, I'm thirsty, my muscles ache, I made it to the top of this mountain. So is it possible, like the Rubik's Cube of it all, that this is a Rubik's Cube, and that we individually are in bettering ourselves. It's changing the texture of the Rubik's Cube of sorts.
And that would be if God were treating it like a logician or something like that. But God would also, in this case, have made the chessboard, would have made the rules of the game.
Yes.
And I can imagine, if you've created art, which many people have, at a certain point in the process, you look at what you've created and you start to see things that you didn't intend, and it changes how you relate to it, and it changes how you create it. You get into a relationship with the thing that you're producing.
Right.
Some people do. I can just imagine being in the same place. Think about how cool it would be to create a tiger, for instance.
Yeah.
What kind of dynamic interaction with reality would you have to get into to produce a compelling being like a tiger?
Or do you produce the tiger, or do you produce the building blocks that end up developing a tiger?
I don't know, but we've now gone. We are over time. We should close and go to your monologue.
Let's go to close.
And I'm glad too, because this is the kind of conversation where you could come in now and have literally no clue what we started talking about 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, when we were talking about the humming and
we're talking about Liz Cheney at
the
first.
interstellar medium.
We got
That was before the show. And we'll come back to that, folks. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, coming live to you from Washington, D.C., our headquarters, newly back in the studio. You're listening again to Fault Lines. We'll be right back in a moment with our soapbox, Jamarl's monologue, and our short back and forth. Be right back.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you consume this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So on my way here, I get on the metro, and in getting on the metro, I eventually tell people, hello in this place. I may get something to drink coming up. I may say hi to the security guard. That's assuming that she's there. But all of these people that I pass, all of the things, all of the textures of our world that make it even possible for me to get from point A to point B, to sit here in the studio, to be talking to you on this electronic medium in the first place, those things are wild when you think about it. Think of all the jobs that are necessary to make that work. The person who has to make sure the air is clean, the person who has to make sure that the area is swept, that there's no vagrants just kind of laying on the subway tracks, getting hit by a subway train. Or for that matter, that there's people who can take my ticket, or people who could help me if I need point A to point B, people who would help me with my coffee and everything else. And I know as a flat fact that many of those people are not making at least $15 an hour. That some of those people, based on what the president has told me, are starving or on a wage that allows a certain degree of starvation. I had a conversation with my mom yesterday, and I was talking to her, and I was telling her that I am so angry about the $15 an hour thing, because we grew up in a household, single parent, that did not make $15 an hour. In many respects, $10, $11. When my mom finally retired, she wasn't even making $15 an hour. So when you're talking to 40 million people, I get what that means in real terms, real physical matter reality terms, in regards to, oh my God, there's a parking ticket, that's a catastrophe. Oh, you have this random bill, that is a disaster. My kid has a trip, how am I going to pay for it? Oh, I feel bad about myself because I can't pay for it. These obligations that I have as a parent, and somehow I feel like this is something besmirching me as an individual just because I don't have the ends to cover things that my kid need, or for that matter, that I need. Those are not situations that we should allow for individuals, and yet society allows those things to take place. So yeah, I feel some kind of way when I'm on the train knowing that some of these people are in a similar situation despite the smile that they have to wear. Or you go to McDonald's and they may be wearing a t-shirt that says, I love my job. You've removed the voice of the employee in that situation who may not love their job and instead put it in words. Something needs to change with this. 42% of the public made less than $18,000 a year. What does that mean? And that was before COVID. And now there's this question, this argument, this conversation that's taking place about, hey, these employment benefits are keeping people from going to work. Is it that? Or is it maybe you should just be paying your workers more? We have the Democratic Party now, shockingly, running with the politically advantageous position of eat rich. I never thought I would hear it. Joe Biden, the guy that locked tens of million people into their student loans, the guy that ruined lives economically and for that matter in a physical way from the standpoint of putting all of those people in jail and the prison sentences. That guy is now taking the politically advantageous position of eat the rich. Let's play the clip.
Like I said, not too long ago, I guess it was back in the 2000 range, thereabouts. Don't hold me to the exact year. I'll have my staff come back with the exact date. The average CEO of the Fortune 500 companies made like 36 times what the average employee of that corporation made. It's over 450 times as much now. As my mother would say, who died and left them, boss? No, seriously, what rationale? Tell me what benefit flows from that. We're not going to deprive any of these executives of their second or third home, travel privately by jet. It's not going to affect their standard of living at all, not a little tiny bit. But I can affect the standard of living of the people I grew up with. If they have a job, I can expect to make sure the standard of living of people I grew up with, if they have child care, can afford it, so 20 million women can be back in the workforce. This is just makes no sense to me. But I'm going to have to be able to explain this, and I'm going to keep banging at it. I think I'm not being solicitous, and I'm not trying to ruin your reputation. I think most of you understand what I'm saying. Whether you agree with me or not, I think you understand what I'm saying. And it's fair to say this is about making the average multimillionaire pay just a fair share. It's not going to affect their standard of living a little bit.
Maybe it should. Now, the wild part about that statement is Biden, it says, what rationale? How do I explain this? He could explain it for the last 40-something years that he was in Congress, but now all of a sudden, I can't explain it. How do I explain this? What's the rationale? Well, I would say you talk to your 40-something self. The key point is, and the thing that is going to aggravate you is the Democrats could have taken this position yesterday, a year ago, a few months ago, 3-4 years ago. But the catch is when nearly 500,000 people die, that argument works. Not just works, it is difficult to find a contrary attack piece against that very specific argument. And even with that, this gets to the populism without the population. Because despite me liking that argument, despite that argument working, well, the question becomes, what's on the other side of that? What are you trying to get? What are you trying to do? And of course, Biden's trying to get, what, $4 trillion in spending, and he's trying to get modest tax increases on those who are in the top 1%. No taxes supposedly going up on people who are less than 400,000. I guess the point that I'm trying to make here, and I'll end it on this. What if, in order to get the society that you need, in order to help those people out, the little Jimmy and little Johnny that Joe Biden grew up with, that is not in good straits, that is not in a decent job, what if it does entail changing their status, changing the capabilities for them to make $20 billion. Maybe they don't need a second jet. Maybe the first one in and of itself is enough. And the catch is, Joe Biden may be taking this for political reasons. And this is absolutely a great political position, because when you ask the public, should you increase taxes on the rich, they say, indubitably, even Republicans, yes. But does he mean it? And how much does he mean it? What are your thoughts, Shane? Do you think he means this? Or is this entirely political casting? Or is this, like, because I can come up, look, I can fashion a thing in my head where Biden says, I need to compete with China. And in needing to compete with China, there's certain things that we need to do in this country to allow us to compete. And one of those things, even though for the last 40-something years, I didn't care about this stuff at all, I care about it now because I need to compete with China. I'm a war hawk, and I'm going to win this contest for America. If that's where he is, I can kind of see him taking that tact. By the same token, Biden didn't pass the $15 an hour minimum wage. And I know I keep going back to that, but you had to, that to me is a barometer of interest. How much do you mean it? And if it's the world is under attack by aliens, okay, what is the president going to do for it? It's like, well, I don't want to raise the budget because I don't want to adversely affect so-and-so despite us being under attack. You would think that would be utterly ludicrous. Or it's like, hey, there's an asteroid that's about to hit the planet. All right, well, I don't want to increase taxes on the wealthy in order to... Well, the fact that we're talking about taxes, the fact that we're talking about economics when the world is about to end, well, it seems ludicrous. So it's my barometer. It's the thing that I use to try to gauge whether or not the person means it, because I don't know what's in his head. If you are not willing to use all of the powers at your disposal to get something like that done, despite the fact that you said people are starving on that wage, then I have to question whether or not whether you mean it, your severity, your how much it digs into you. And I think it digs into him on some level, but I don't think it digs into him on a deep level. I think on some level he hit upon the right politics. Whether he means it or not, I don't know what's on the inside. What are your thoughts? You think he means it? Or do you think it's, no, this is just a good political disposition for him to take that is going to basically eat Republicans alive because they can't compete with it?
Because they can't push back against it too strong.
It's hard to push back against that.
Again, you can like speculate on what Trump specifically would say about these policies. If he had a voice on Twitter, if he were more active, if we were hearing more often from him. I mean, I'm coming to him because I think a couple of the guests we've had on recently who've said something similar to this are pretty correct. Trump is the future of at least the present incarnation of the Republican Party. So looking at where he's going to judge things and the lines he's going to take is going to help to a good extent to determine how the Republicans are going to feel about it.
Because he may partially agree. He may be like, yeah, we need the infrastructure plan.
Well, and he did on the one thing that he gave Biden big compliments, effusive praise for, where it was his withdrawal from Afghanistan, a decision which was, of course, in line with Trump's withdrawal, a bit delayed from it as Trump brought up. But, yeah, and Trump is more interesting on the economic side of things. On the other hand, what's weird to me about this is how Biden is effectively taking the middle ground between Obama and Trump, whether it's on the JCPOA or on taxes, him raising it literally halfway back to the rates under Obama from where Trump dropped it to.
Because I think Obama had it, it was like at 30-something%.
Yeah, I think it was like 32%, something like that.
And Trump dropped it to like 22 or something, some obscene amount.
Exactly.
Or 21, I believe.
Exactly. And Biden is wanting to raise it back up at exactly halfway to the amount that Trump dropped it from, which is just kind of weird. Again, you're taking the middle ground between, I'll put it like this.
If you mean it, get rid of it.
Well, yeah, okay, so it's almost like I'm trying to figure out a good metaphor to explain what I want to do here. But just very briefly, if Biden is just trying to get a sense of perspective and a sense of relationship here.
Yeah.
From what we've talked about on the show, Biden is left of Obama in some key ways. Yet Biden is right on Obama in one of the more important parts of economic policy, which is
taxes,
which is the corporate tax rate, like one of the foundational ways in which you would be considered left or right based on the amount of obligation, responsibility financially that you're putting on companies across the nation, that kind of thing, versus the people or whatever, however you're getting the tax money. My point is, where did things change? Like, isn't there a weird reshifting of perspective where we can honestly say that Biden seems to the left of Obama in some key ways, when actually, and what we're talking about specifically here, he's in between Obama and Trump, literally 50% of the way. In other words, he is to the right of Obama. Do you see what I'm saying? There's like this political disorientation that it seems like we're going through, and I don't know. I think you get where I'm going.
It seems to be like, I think what you're looking for is scale. I think that's what you're
Yeah,
looking for.
scale and consistency. Yeah, and if we're using a word like left wing, or if we're likening Biden to
It's like,
FDR,
what does it mean? How does it apply?
What does it mean? Yeah, what are the metrics? If you have to look brass tacks at what's actually being done, that would seem to be one of the key metrics. And yet he's halfway between Obama and Trump on this. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think done is the key point. What are you doing? Like, it's one thing to say something like that speech. I like that speech. Any lefty would be like, yes, like it. Like Sanders could have given that speech. He would have given it far better. And Biden, again, the physicality of giving the speech is lacking. Like that speech, if you go back and listen to even Ted Kennedy's speech, where Ted Kennedy was trying to increase the minimum wage, and he's screaming, "How much more greed is enough?" Like it's a great speech.
You keep referencing it.
Yeah, because it's a great speech. Yeah. He's trying to increase the minimum wage by like $2. And Ted Kennedy is like screaming at the top of his lungs, "How much more greed is enough? How much do you require from these American citizens?" Like, it's so good. It's so good. It's so angry. Like, but that's the point. It's angry because it gets this position of how you guys have gotten billions in tax breaks. And we're asking for $2 for the American public, and you don't care about the American worker. To that, like, there's a certain righteous indignation that is there that Biden just can't seem to muster. Like, even in that speech, he's given this kind of halting speech. Andre, can we play the speech again just so people can hear it? I just want to give my point. Listen to how, like, it's very wispy and weak, but the speech shouldn't be that way. This speech should be delivered with a certain degree of forcefulness in regards to backing the American worker. Let's play this one more time.
Like I said, not too long ago, I guess it was back in the 2000 range, thereabouts. Don't hold me to the exact year. I'll have my staff come back with the exact date. The average CEO of the Fortune 500 companies makes like 36 times what the average employee of that corporation made. It's over 450 times as much now. As my mother would say, who died and left them, boss? No, seriously, what rationale? Tell me what benefit flows from that. We're not going to deprive any of these executives of their second or third home, travel privately by jet. It's not going to affect their standard of living at all, not a little tiny bit. But I can affect the standard of living that people I grew up with. If they have a job, I can expect to make sure the standard of living of people I grew up with, if they have child care and can afford it, so 20 million women can be back in the workforce. This is just makes no sense to me. But I'm going to have to be able to explain this, and I'm going to keep banging at it. I think I'm not being solicitous, and I'm not trying to ruin your reputation. I think most of you understand what I'm saying. Whether you agree with me or not, I think you understand what I'm saying. And it's fair to say this is about making the average multimillionaire pay just a fair share. It's not going to affect their standard of living a little bit.
But it should. And he's like, I'm not trying to be too solicitous. I'm not trying to ruin your reputations. I'm not trying to... Look, no lefty is going to be against the speech. I mean, especially from this notion of how do you justify a third jet when these mothers don't have childcare? And, on some level, Republicans are being held up on their own petard on this. I mean, they always say, how do you pay for it? How do you pay for it? And if you notice, Democrats always say, how do you pay for it? How do you pay for it? They always ask that question. And Biden is like, we're going to pay for it by raising taxes. Oh, my God, what do you mean you're going to raise taxes? So you just don't expect this stuff to take place. Like, because you can't have it both ways. You can't scream, how do you pay for it? Biden says we're going to pay for it by increasing taxes on uber wealthy, and then you complain about the fact that you're raising taxes on the uber wealthy. So you just don't want these programs at all. But no lefty is going to complain about that. I think the issue becomes is, do you mean it? That's all that matters, right? I care less about whether it's said, because for me, it could be used as a prop. And you have all of these people applauding Biden for words. It's like, that's nice, but do you mean it? And the only barometer that I have for meaning is the bill that was passed that didn't include a 15. So it's like, I applaud this. That's nice, tepid applause, but I need to see what you do. And going forward, there's this notion of the filibuster. There's this notion of $4 trillion that he's talking about spending. And it's like, how do you get that passed? That's what matters. And if you're going to get this stuff bogged down in bipartisanship and everything else, this could be just good politics, for all I know. without the real meaning of it. I mean, think of Bill Clinton. I feel your pain. I feel your pain, Shane. But yes, I am going to, deregulate telecommunications and increase the prison, like get rid of welfare and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Glass-Steagall. I'm going to do all of those things despite feeling your pain. I don't need you to feel my pain, dog. I need you to put through policies that are going to be beneficial to the American public. And in doing so, I think you also bring down the temperature in regards to the conflict that is taking place either between individuals, either between groups, either between classes, and people in general. I really do. And so, I mean, this is nice. It's like an eat the rich from Democrats. And it's not even Democrats, it's Biden. Because you have some Democrats that disagree with Biden on this, who are like, whoa, what are you talking about? I'm uncomfortable with this. And, Bernie Sanders is like, just relax and let it happen. That's where Bernie is right now. Bernie's like, just let it happen. just relax and let it happen. He's like touching Biden's hair. Just let it happen, Biden. Just let it happen. But I don't know if Biden is really there. That's the catch. And I don't necessarily know if it's beneficial to be taken for a ride. And that's where I think we are. I think he's taking people for a ride. Now the catch is, what do they do? And look, I reserve, I'm suspending belief just for a split second, even though clearly I'm not suspending belief at all. I need to see it. And I'm not one of those people that just hear Biden say, I've been around for too long for this. I lived through the hope and change, hope and change, hope and change. And then at the end of it, it's like, we achieved hope and change. And it's like, yeah, but 30% of Democrats who voted for you went to Republicans. They didn't believe that they got their hope and change. Otherwise, they wouldn't have went and voted for Trump. I mean, whatever the woman's name, Stefanik, the one that's
Lee Stefanik.
Yeah, Stefanik. Her district went from Obama to Trump, about like 30%. And so it's like, no, you didn't get the hope and change. And don't gaslight me to pretend that we got some quote unquote hope and change. That didn't happen. You protected Wall Street. You let homeowners go bust. You allowed, this particular situation to get. Donald Trump doesn't exist without this kind of degradation of our system.
Oh, but neither would have Obama. Obama came to rise literally on hope and change.
That's right, on Bush.
Yeah, in relation to Bush and the 2008 financial crisis.
But do you think that was more racial, or do you think that was economic? Like, do you think if there was no economic crash, does Obama still make it?
I think that. I don't know,
because he didn't seem to run on economics.
But I think that's more of a hinge than the racial issue. I think that for a lot of people, you
mean a hook into it?
Yeah. I think for a lot of people who voted for Obama, it was probably more like the plum in the pudding or the icing on the cake than it would have, than his response to the economic crisis, in the sense that there are deeper fundamental economic changes. You need healthcare. He was pushing for a lot of this stuff back in the primaries, of course, back in 2007.
And he seemed like a lefty. I mean, just in his language.
Yes.
Which is my point.
But when people voted for Obama, sure, they voted for him because they were on the left, but there were plenty of people who also voted for him because he was something different.
Yes.
And because they got the sense that he was this young, not an outsider, but a young sort of insurgent with this new strain of politics. And a lot of the sentiment that led to them to vote for Obama back then in 2007, 2008, it would apply the same thing now.
Yes.
It would have been the same thing during the election of Trump in 2020 or in 2016. But there was such a reaction to Trump that the people got burnt on him. Even whether you hated him or not, most people just didn't care. And if they started to care, it was 2016, 2017, during this constant cycle where everything became so factionalized that if you were to express some hesitancy about Trump, like positive hesitancy to your left-wing friends, they would probably reject you pretty quickly. Exactly. The identities got so consolidated around it that people inevitably just lined up with whatever they would have expected their friends to want them to line up with. Anyway, that's where we are now. And people are disengaged a bit more from politics, I think, at this point, because they're really liking the reprieve. No, Biden does not seem to be making any of these big structural changes that you're talking about. But it's interesting to see him using the soft, again, the kind of folksy, trying to seem not like an outsider to Washington politics, but more like the familiar avuncular, your uncle, like that kind of like the gentle, non-creepy uncle is how he wants to come
the
across.
Slowing of the voice,
the
whispering,
exactly, confident and reassuring,
folks.
Exactly,
that type of stuff.
Exactly that kind of thing. That's the identity that he wants to set, because I think he thinks people will prefer that to how Trump made them feel, which is like the lecherous, weirdly young-looking grandfather. I don't know, who says racist stuff and has a profitable business on the side, but you're kind of leery of over Thanksgiving or something like this. I don't know exactly who Trump would be in this situation, but Biden is setting his identity intentionally, knowing as a politician that he should lead with his personality, because he doesn't want to put too strident a policy up. He was elected as this sort of soft populist figure, not a big reformer coming in, and he knows that he doesn't have to. Why swing for the seats when you could just sort of do the punt thing and get what you need to get done through, get yourself reelected, get Democrats ideally in 2022. We need to close this out. Yeah,
we can close it and we can take calls.
Exactly.
But look, I think that's a good point. I would point one thing. This notion and this idea that Joe Biden is fighting for the middle class. Now, and when I mean that, I mean it fighting for the votes of the middle class. Like, I think there was this understanding from the standpoint of Democrats that they were the party of, ideally, the working man. I mean, if you think of Republicans as classically the party of the rich, and you have this idea of FDR that basically set the tone of what the Democrats were, the language and everything else, and then you get Trump that pulls workers. I mean, like, when you get to the union stuff, Trump was winning that stuff. And so it's like, all right, how did the Democratic Party lose its base? Like, how does a billionaire beat out a Democrat for a demographic? And then you get Biden coming in with this kind of folksy language. Oh, I grew up during that way. I'm one of you. I'm one of the workers. I'm et cetera. I'm going to fight for Ohio and all of this stuff. The language on some level is also trying to pull back that group, that contingent, into the Democratic Party ranks. I strongly believe that. Like, that's why he's taking this tact. I mean, but again, this is language. It's what you do that matters. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment. We'll be taking calls. The number is 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Thomas, Stranahan, Fault Lines, back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And so we've been talking about basically politics and about whether Joe Biden actually believes the eat the rich line that he seems to be playing in regards to the political space, where Democrats are, you could say, fighting on this issue of the middle class. They're fighting on this issue of trying to get the middle class voters. And if you listen to the tact, Biden is spending some cheddar to do it, around $4 trillion. And he's also added on to the eat the rich line on top of that with taxes in order to supposedly pay for that. Now, whether or not the taxes indeed pays for it, whether or not that money gets hit to the employees by lower wages or something to the fact, that's somewhat secondary to the fact that Joe Biden is talking about doing it, and secondary to the fact that the American public wholeheartedly, genuinely agrees across the board. And so what does Joe Biden mean? How much of it does he mean? How much of it is he going to get? What is the urgency of this? So those are the questions that are honestly that avail us at this point. The number is 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. We're taking your calls. You think he means it, Shane? Or do you think this is just politics? That Joe Biden is saying whatever Joe Biden needs to win the midterms to maintain for his party? He's a transitional candidate. and as a transitional candidate, he wants to get Kamala Harris the best footing that he possibly can get her. So he's going to say Kamala Harris is going to head up the immigration issue. Kamala Harris is going to head up the immigration, the issue of reparations. Kamala Harris is going to head up the issue of all of this economic development. She's doing it all. And so the idea being that by the time he leaves, let's say in 3 years, Kamala Harris takes over, she could say, I ran all of these programs for Joe Biden. I did this. I did that. I'm Kamala Harris. Vote me in if you want to continue this Biden presidency that does. I think it's that. I think that's what he's doing. And so it's like, it's weird, though, because even she's almost not around. Like, I don't see her.
No, she isn't.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Well, yeah, and on immigration, which you'd think if she's going to step up, she instead tried to sidestep it by making it about Guatemala and Honduras and Mexico and making it a foreign policy issue. We talked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are a couple different ways you could look at this, and we got a couple calls, so I'll be quick. You could look at it from Biden's personal. Okay, what does Biden personally want to do? Not even in a legacy sense, but okay, he's almost 80 years old. What's his intention here? He's still clearly a political creature, but I get the sense that he's lost whatever vitality he may have once had. So personally, whatever his intent is, whatever his grand vision there is, if there is one, he just lacks the energy to get a lot of stuff done. And so he's pushing for things that he probably likes in some sense, but that's that. In terms of his legacy, I think he's already kind of made it. He was the vice president under Obama. Now all of a sudden he's the president. He's been in Congress for nigh on 50 years. He has plenty of experience under his belt. I think he's set. I think he's thinking with the party in terms of, okay, as a Democrat, for the interests of my cohorts, my coworkers, my fellow beneficiaries of the corporate state, where do we go and what do we do? They didn't learn anything from 2016. They blamed that on the Russians. This one, they blamed a little bit less on the Russians and a little bit more on domestic extremism, whatever that exactly is. And really, it just means the Republican Party under Trump. Because that's what led to it. When we're talking domestic extremism, sure, there's QAnon. There are like cult-like things going on here. But the big cult-like thing that's happening here is I'm distracted. There's Richard Wolff on the TV right over there, folks. Guest on the show. I see him. Sorry, big
back in studio.
Yeah. Exactly. No, yeah, that'd be great, but no, not quite. But you domestic extremism after January 6, 2021 is really just the Republican Party. It's really just the people who believed, and this is, I'm not saying this is my opinion. This seems to be the sort of consensus tacitly or subliminally among Democrats in Washington. If you supported Donald Trump in his disputation of the election, well, then where are you going to fall on January 6th? I mean, take this a little bit literally. If you talk to a Republican voter who believes that Donald Trump had the election stolen from him, where are they going to land on the issue of January 6th? At best, I would say they're going to think that it was a mistake, but that it's had some merit to it.
Yeah.
It's
not going to be a complete rejection.
It's not, because how could it be?
Yeah.
Because if you on the one hand believe that the election was stolen, and then on the other hand you're pushing back against something that could be seen as deeply American, revolting against your government, rising up to an unjust tyranny, that kind of thing.
If the election was stolen, then January 6th is justified.
That's the thing. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so who are the domestic extremists, quote unquote?
That's the catch.
It's the Republicans.
I mean, but now I hope you see why I reacted so strongly against that. Because it feels like, because if you think about right now, Liz Cheney has voted with Donald Trump almost like 90%. Like, it's obscene and like 1-to-1. And yet she's on the outs. She's going to lose her position to somebody who did not vote for Trump that ideologically like that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, she is more moderate. I mean, like, I keep messing her name, Stepanek. But she's more moderate. Like, if you look at her record, she is nowhere near this kind of hardcore neocon in the way that Liz Cheney is. She's on her way out, though. Liz Cheney is on her way out. And one catch. Oh, good. One catch. Trump. Do you believe in Trump? Liz Cheney says no, and that's all you need. We have callers. Let's go to the first caller. I think we have Brave and ATL. Brave, what's going on, my man?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Good morning. Touching, I guess, lightly on what you guys are talking about, but admittedly going off into a different direction.
Go for it.
The headlines in Georgia this morning are that Kemp is, and other Republican-led states are looking at cutting back the unemployment benefits in reaction to the whole
yes,
we can't find enough workers to come out and work thing. And so what they're planning is to opt out of the $300 plus up from the federal government.
it's not just Kemp. There's a few of them.
Right, exactly. This is supposedly more so the Republican-led states. And,
Montana, South Carolina. Anyway.
Right. And so this on the heels of the stories or the reporting, whereas funds went out to the different states to help people that were behind with their rent, but somehow the money didn't get out to people. So you still have people facing eviction, and then you have the CDC eviction moratorium being lifted in certain places. All of these things lead me to wonder if they actually want the explosion of the people running out into the streets and just burning everything. I just wonder that, right? And I'll bring that. I'll tie that back into what you're talking about this morning with.
Or do you think it doesn't go there?
Right.
I mean, or do you think from their standpoint, the public wouldn't do that? Like they don't believe it. Like if you were FDR, you were around during the Russian Revolution. You could see it. You could smell it. You could go there. You could see the people. The people were still alive. What about now? Soviet Union's gone bust. There is no other prevailing world order in regards to competition. And for the most part, you've had a public that has been, for the last 30, 40 years, docile. And so is it possible from their point, they don't see this, the response that you're thinking of people running into the streets? They're just this kind of certain level of brinksmanship? What are your thoughts?
It's a funny thing. On my side of town where I live, people are doing pretty well. And even so on my side of town, this whole idea of shutdowns and lockdowns and whether things are getting back to normal, people have already been out. The people have still been out. So that never really took effect here, right? But on the other side of town where I grew up, right, things are bad. People are tired. People are hot. And you can go on Facebook. You can go on Twitter. And I'm not talking about just the messaging boards and the little comments. I'm talking about go to the unemployment in any state you choose. Go to the unemployment Facebook page or the unemployment Twitter page, whatever the case is, and look at and take your poll from the comments and the messages and the visceral anger and pain that people are expressing on these platforms. That's the real poll. And so these politicians like Kemp, they may not believe it. And I can't help but wonder now at this point with Keisha Lance Bottoms stepping down, and maybe she took and Tulsi Gabbard saying, you know what, I'm done, I'm out. I can't help but wonder if they look at these things and they're reading the terrain and they're like, and it's all speculation, but you know what, you guys' heads are too far up your rear and you're not seeing what's right there in front of you, and you're so used to playing team football that you don't, and you're underestimating the pain of these people in these streets and in these cities.
I think that's what would be going on. Assuming for a second that what you're seeing there is representative. It's not that there's that they're trying to stoke on civil unrest in the United States to help them maintain. I'm just coming up with it, but to help them maintain their control and power. However that would work. I think they're just out of touch. They're incompetent and understand that some people are actually suffering. But then there's the real question: would we see that level of civil unrest? What would it take? What would it take to see, return to, I guess, August of last year style tactics on the street and engagements on a mass scale? I don't know what it would take. I think a couple more big economic events, a bigger economic crisis than I've seen in a little while. But hey, maybe I'm out of touch too. We have another caller. Brave, thank you for the call. We also have Nate calling in from Atlanta. Nate, you're on. What's on your mind?
Hello. I want to talk about Elon Musk chip that y'all talked about yesterday, and right now I'm on season 2 of Star Trek, The Next Generation, and it oddly reminds me of the two aliens that Picard came in contact throughout. I'll get on with these two, so maybe there's more, but one was the binary, the race that was completely
Nate,
computerized.
we've got to close. You're a little bit hard to hear, but I saw Jamarl's face peek up as soon as you said the word Star Trek. He looked up at me from across the table, so feel free to call back in. But maybe check your connection. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a minute with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning's show.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Jane Stranahan.
And that would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's go to the headlines. Good show this morning. Really interesting. Back and forths. I like the conversation. I like it. We need to think about doing this more often in regards to like callers early and that type of stuff. It gives energy to the show.
This whole talk show thing.
Yeah.
We should talk
more
on the show more.
Yeah. I was, when you're thinking of like Rising or somewhere, they talk a lot. Like many of the guests, like it's not all just guests. Like it's a lot of it is talk. Like even if you think about the old shows, like when TYT started and all that other stuff, they just used to sit there and talk.
Yeah.
And that used to be like the radio show and that type of stuff. And maybe that's not a bad idea. I mean, it's always something to talk about. And sometimes the stories aren't necessarily like a full-blown story. It may be like multiple tidbits of news that end up just kind of taking the conversation and the audience go on. That might not be a bad idea, especially if early in the mornings. Ooh, we can talk about it. All right, inside baseball. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, more than 340,088 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with just under 700 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 38,135 cases per day, a decrease of 29% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 35% of the American public has been fully vaccinated. 46% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 32,806,602 people across the United States and has killed 582,362. More than 250,000 people have been confirmed to have died from the coronavirus in India, which has just saw upwards of 348,420 cases and a record 4,205 deaths on Wednesday. A variant of the virus first detected in India, B1617, has been spreading and is now found in 49 countries and was upgraded on Monday to a variant of concern by the World Health Organization for its ability to spread more quickly and potentially resist some antibodies. Britain's economy has contracted negative 1.5% on the previous quarter, with a return to growth this March, 2.1% growth. Some gas pumps are running dry in southeastern United States, with 16% of stations empty in South Carolina and 1/10 empty in Georgia and Florida after Colonial Pipeline was shut down after being the subject of a ransomware cyber attack. Robert Long is facing murder charges and hate crime for his mid-March murders in Fulton County, Georgia, with the district attorney seeking the death penalty, the first test of new hate crime legislation passed by Georgia's legislature. Liz Cheney delivered a defiant speech yesterday in advance of a vote by Republicans today to vacate her seat as House Republican Conference Chair. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later today. Pennsylvania Attorney General warned against the existence of ghost guns, with Republican Senator Ted Cruz saying that ghost guns are a non-issue, with Democrats wanting to, quote, trace every gun in America, unquote. Military bombardments by Israel against Palestinians and by Hamas against Israelis has continued and has grown their heaviest in recent years. At least 35 Palestinians and 6 people in Israel have died since Monday. In related news, Israel's Commissioner is that there's been an unprecedented level of violence between Israeli Arabs and Israelis, with the action in some cities resembling a civil war. Groups protesting for and against the Israelis and Palestinians have been taken to the streets in recent days. In Israel, the United States, and other countries. Pakistan has called on Muslim nations to condemn Israel's actions and stand by Palestinians, with Qatar and Egypt working on a possible ceasefire. A survey conducted by an American business group shows that upwards of 40% of those living in Hong Kong are thinking of moving, with 62% moving, citing concerns about the new national security law and the influence of Beijing. Officials in Afghanistan said a second district has now been taken by Islamist militants. Interesting. Airbus would have to stand trial for manslaughter for a crash 12 years ago that killed 228 people. And last, in Earth science, the Voyager 1 satellite is reporting a faint, unidentified humming sound from the interstellar medium. The interstellar medium is a largely vacuous zone between the solar systems. Very interesting. Basically, a sound in the void. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. This is interesting on so many levels. I mean, we've been beaming out music into the cosmic void. Like, if I'm not mistaken, the Beatles or Paul McCartney, I think, where we've been sending that stuff out into the space. Like, there's so many dystopian stories that could come about from that. Like a species that just conquered another species sitting there listening. Where's this coming from? Let's go visit that group. You know, that type of stuff. But the thing I want to get to, there are a few of these stories that are really interesting. The Liz Cheney delivering a defiant speech yesterday in advance of the Republicans talking about getting rid of her. The gas pumps running dry. Even that's phenomenal. I mean, that's something that I haven't seen in America. Well, not since my birth. India's B1617 being spread. And this goes to this notion in that, you know, there are no walls high enough that something that's taking place that far in India with that many people and with our level of travel, there's no way to put a block on it. There's no way to put a wall high enough on it. That thing, it spreads. It's a virus. And so it's like you're seeing what was located in India now being spread all over the planet. But let's get into this one for a moment. The military bombardment. We had the conversation yesterday with, I forget the gentleman's name, forgive me, Leah Maroof, and explaining what was taking place on the ground there with the attacks. The catch in the question is this: if you have an atrocity committed to you, does it allow you some moral, ethical rationale to commit another one on somebody else? And if not, then the question of Israel needs to be raised. Now, we get into this notion that the U.S. has pretended that there was some arrangement, some deal that was going to be struck, that these guys were in a peace negotiation. And despite that, we turned a blind eye as they built nuclear weapons. We turned a blind eye as they allocated all of these weapons, as they would do these killings. I remember the last one, 2,000 people, 80% of which were civilians. Like, these incursions have been vast and extreme. And you have basically Israel becoming a modern day America in the Middle East. I mean, honestly, if you had a video camera back during the time where you had the Native Americans, I think what you would see is something very similar. I mean, even if you look at Gaza and the West Bank, they look like two reservations in two separate parts of the country as Israelis expand. I think if you're asking what's the end point on some level is ethnic cleansing. But I think the end point is basically America. That's what I think, that they're looking, and in their heads, we can take more and more and more land. And then what we're going to have is basically we're going to have a certain degree of land that's appropriated as ours. And these guys are going to be in reservations. And if you look at the map of Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, it looks just like that. It looks just like it. And so, you know, if you are taking somebody's land, does a person have a right to defend their land? And the catch becomes there's a different question between whether they have a right to do it and whether they can do it. Two different things. And whether it's even smart in the way that they go about it, despite the emotional push. reality is organization is better, but emotionality can get involved in those things where it feels like we must fight back, we must respond, we must do X. But is it smart? This issue that's taking place right now, we are giving these guys a pass. And, Ned Price wants to talk about this entirely from the Israeli side. But the catch is you have a lot of Palestinians who are being killed here. And the U.S. is basically silent on this. I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mean, how did you view this? I mean, basically, they were trying to take the land in a certain neighborhood. That created a huge amount of conflict between, the groups, between Palestinians and Israelis. The Israelis go and hit al-aqsa mosque. Yeah. And at that point, you have a huge reaction where, it gets that much more pitch, where they fire missiles. I think what's primary here, though, is the appropriation and the theft of land. If the theft of land wasn't a part of this conversation, the other stuff doesn't happen. And so America, we ignore that part. And I have to be honest, these other Muslim nations that have basically tossed the Palestinians to the wayside should be ashamed of themselves. Abraham, of course, What are your thoughts on this? I've been talking for a while. But how do you view what has been taking place in regards to the back and forth and I guess you could say the escalation of violence between these two? Well, the violence hasn't stopped, but you know what I mean.
Well, the reason that I think it might be appropriate for an American to have an opinion on this, you can have an opinion on whatever the hell you want to, but a sort of more a feeling of responsibility, which is the mantle that the United States takes up as a way to protect itself from scrutiny and too much criticism when it decides to intervene in other nations. The reason that I think it's appropriate in this case, of course, is that we have defended and allied with Israel for such a long time. If we hadn't done that, if I were living in randomly the Czech Republic, or Germany, or Timbuktu, I wouldn't be nearly as closely associated with this, and therefore I could feel like I had some more confidence in just maintaining my distance. I don't need to have an opinion. Yeah. That would be a little bit more of the attitude that I have. It's their issue. But the problem is, as an American, we have allied with and supported Israel turn after turn since the mid-20th century, effectively. And despite some traumas in that relationship, we continue to do that and continue to give them protection from scrutiny by world organizations, including the United Nations and other bodies that have been in their amalgamated form pretty critical of Israel and what Israel has done and continues to do. The fundamental problem is at least twofold. One, I don't know how the hell to actually solve it. Right. Even if I could steer America and steer Israel, I don't know how to solve that problem in a way that leaves millions of people satisfied.
Do you think America could solve that problem? Like with its relationship with Israel as it is, if America was like, you know what, fix this. Like, let's say not what Trump did. Let's say instead of having the policy that Trump's like, I'm not going to talk to Palestinians, I'm just going to come up with it. What if he did talk to Palestinians?
I hear you. I increasingly think that Americans cannot solve any problems outside of our borders effectively. And I'm not. I'm not kidding. And I'm not trying to be like, cute with that one. I think that,
I disagree with that.
We've taken up the habit of trying to solve too many problems outside of our borders.
That I agree.
Characteristically, we've fallen into that habit. We can't get out of it. Like an alcoholic who tries to justify their drinking at a social engagement. Oh, it's just making me, a little bit more
just looser,
fluid, looser, more flexible.
My uncle told me one time I got to deal with the kids.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the excuse to be like 5 fingers deep. But no, we've gotten into the habit of that too much. And so if we start hitting the booze again, it's not like it's suddenly just going to make us a great gregarious friend around the world. If we start invading other countries, if we start using heavy-handed diplomatic and sanction-based behavior specifically, that has some serious problems too. The most important problems that America needs to solve, if it wants to help the Palestinians and the Israelis, and this is where it gets cute, we need to solve our own problems first. This is where, there's a little bit of, okay, but what are you actually saying there? Are you just saying that we should abandon all of our commitments? Not maybe more of them. Not all of them necessarily, but maybe quite a bit more of them.
Is that one of them?
At least a couple of them.
Is this one of them? Because I disagree with that. I mean, I agree with you broadly.
Yeah.
But on this issue, we have given them so much money and we've given them so many weapons that it becomes, like you said, on some level, we're responsible on some level. Like if the United States wasn't supporting Israel all these years, would Israel continue to exist? And that's a difficult question to answer.
Shouldn't they go out and learn how to continue to exist in the world on their own?
1,000% agree. 1,000% agree with you. But because we've dedicated so much money, because there's a question of whether or not we even gave them the nuclear weapons. And if so, how do you let that go? Don't on some level you have almost like a philosophical or ethical responsibility to deal with them and to try to make that issue better, considering we've given them such an overwhelming advantage where they don't have to negotiate. Like meaning our negotiations that were a sham has basically allowed them to continue to expropriate more and more land. Meaning, instead of us really having some real terms of negotiation, we had negotiations as they stole land. We made that worse. We allowed them cover for this all of these years. How do we extricate ourselves from this now, saying, all right, we don't have any part of this now, despite the fact that 90% of the land has basically been taken while we were in these sham negotiations? I do think the U.S. has a role in this. In the same way that Donald Trump brought all those countries together, the U.S. could have done that while bringing Israel to the table in earnest negotiation. We're not going to give you the billions. What happens? We're not going to give you the weapons. What happens? We're not going to protect you from the UN. What happens? Does Israel become more likely to make some kind of peace deal? Look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is existential enemy with Iran. The moment that the U.S. is like, all right, we're pulling out, we're making a deal, it's like, all right, let's talk. Would Israel do the same thing? And I do think, I agree with you that I don't think our weight should be, you must do X. I think our weight might need to be, yeah, we're pulling out. And maybe that in and of itself is enough to kind of push opinion.
It would be.
Yeah.
They would have to figure out what they're doing.
Right.
And if they didn't have some immediate success, I'm guessing that Netanyahu actually wouldn't last that long at that point. If Israel started to face not just more of a military threat in the long run, but also immediate financial hardships because they're no longer getting subsidized by the American government, and suddenly trade is coming into question, and suddenly a lot of the flows of investments that they've been dependent on are drying up. All of that stuff happening together, that would lead to a wider economic crisis. They would have to pivot and figure out who they're going to ally with in the region, and that would make a change happen. I don't know how else to say it, but I don't think we should or could or would do anything overnight. This is going to be a phased process.
Right.
If we were to go through with something like it. And the problem is, with the way that politics is right now, one president could start it and the next president could stop it, and then you could just have this roller coaster, which is kind of the period it seems that we're in now diplomatically in a lot of our relationships with these other countries, whether you're looking at Saudi Arabia and our level of engagement there, or Ukraine, our level of engagement there. There's some continuities, but there's a lot of questions too. We need to go to a break though. We're going to be coming back with our next guest, Dr. Mikhail Kogan, talking about the coronavirus, different variants, vaccines for teens, and the role of oxygen, specifically oxygen concentrators, ventilators. We're going to be going over some of this stuff with our next guest. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break. We will be back on the other side in just a minute.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are joined by our guest, Dr. Mikhail Kogan, the medical director at the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and the founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute. That's a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. Dr. Kogan, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm pretty good. I'm not happy about what happening in Middle East, but
neither are we. But we are also, I think, pretty good, and we're glad to have you. We got a lot to talk about here. We've only got about a half an hour in which to talk about it, so I want to get into it. Let's start with vaccines for teens and potentially under, with first Canada last week and now the United States with Pfizer-BioNTech specifically approving the use of these vaccines by people, say, age 12 to 15. Now, Pfizer is saying that they're also pursuing use for those age 11 and under. So in other words, bringing it down to children. Now, every morning we go over some COVID statistics in the headlines. And one of the numbers that for the past couple of weeks we've been putting in there are the number of people in the United States who are either fully vaccinated or partially vaccinated. We're up to over a third of the whole population, adults and children, everybody included, over a third of the population at this point, fully vaccinated, almost half, 46% as of this morning, being partially vaccinated. How, I guess we can look at this from, many different angles, but I'll start with two. For one thing, how significant would the addition of those younger populations be if you're trying to reach full vaccination? How important is it? Is it medically just as advantageous as vaccinating adults? And then secondarily, I'm just curious, for you as a doctor, how do you think about the risk specifically to young people, to children who are, under the responsibility of, under the care of their parents or other guardians, under the care of adults? How do you think about this as a doctor, whether or not it's right to vaccinate kids? Dr. Kogan.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really way harder question, I think, than when we talked about general population of adults. When we try to vaccinate someone, there are two things that, as a physicians, we think, right? I mean, we think about what is the person's individual chance of contracting disease and getting really sick from it, right? So we're quite well aware that kids, teenagers, and children, younger children, really, if they are getting infected with COVID, very small percent of kids ends up in a hospital, and even smaller percent of kids have really serious complications. So here, and everybody knows this. So, the key question here, when we're giving this vaccine, are we giving it to protect our kids, or are we giving it to try to establish herd immunity, protect the rest of the household? Let's say there is a family with a grandkids, and when you vaccinate children that are obviously going to be outside, especially summer is coming, they potentially going to go to camps, they're going to hang out with more kids.
It protects the grandparents.
So then the grandparents are left unprotected if the children are hanging out and then they're bringing it home, even if they themselves not getting sick. So I think the government's going to have a whole lot more complicated scheme here to try to say to parents like myself, and I have 11 and 13-year-old, what are you going to do? And here comes, so if I felt very comfortable with adults and even older adults to say, look, we got to vaccinate. I don't know. I actually on the fence here. So I looked at the study that was recently published, and the efficacy is dramatic. It was 100% effective vaccine, specifically Pfizer. And the question is, they have run side effect profile for a very brief period of time. So there are two problems here. I do think that vaccine is relatively safe. However, the children, their immune system is changing. And that's really the crux of it. I mean, how do we know for sure that, let's say, in 2, 3, 6 years from now, we're not going to start seeing some weird side effects simply because we did not really account for a possibility of the immune system that's currently this changing to something different. Now, is there a significant chance of that? I don't know. I'm not an immunologist, but I'm sure that this question is on everybody's mind. And so I'm really on the fence. One part of me, of course, wants to say, look, let's get the kids, all kids this age vaccine. My kids then can safely go to camps. They can hang out with their grandparents. And the part of me says, well, if I simply isolate my kids from grandkids or have them hang out on a significant distance, then how critical is it for me to vaccinate them? And I don't have a real clarity here. So I want to see other experts to chime in. I definitely want to see a very senior experts, not just to say, look, let's do it just because we should be doing it, but I want to have very significant conversation about what is their long-term risk here. I'm not worried about short-term problems with kids. I don't think they're going to have any. I think the deal is, though, what's going to happen a few years from now.
Well, is it possible for them to know what's going to happen a few years from now? I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is from the mRNA vaccine, that's not entirely a vaccine, right? I mean, basically, it's sending a message to the cell and telling the cell to do X or Y. And in the context of telling the cell to do X or Y, your concern is that, let's start there. What is your concern in the context of that? I know you said their immune system could change later on, but what does that mean? What does that look like in real terms? I mean, if they're just creating an antibody, why would that cause some kind of secondary consequence or secondary side effect, if that makes sense? I hope I'm asking the question correctly.
Right. No, absolutely right. No, I mean, it doesn't just causes antibody. I mean, we do know that there is a significant shift in the immunity that occurs. I mean, specifically in autoimmunity, right? So there are a number of mild side effects in adults that have been reported, which, they're in the long run probably not concerning because you're weighing the risk and benefit, right? So this is the key component. In medicine, we don't just simply say, look, I'm going to give a person A something because I want to protect somebody else. My first point, I mean, that's the second point. My first point is, what is the risk and benefit of doing something to somebody? And if you tell me that the risk of a child dying from COVID is so small right now, it is really small, then as a physician, I have to take a look very carefully and say this, well, so if I don't for sure know that in 5-10 years from now, a 15-year-old is not going to end up with a very severe autoimmune condition, or let's say a kid was predisposed to an autoimmune condition, but it's going to show up a few years earlier and be more severe. Do I know for a fact it's not going to happen? I don't know. But, the benefit here is less, and everybody agreed to that. The benefit of this vaccine for children is simply less because they're much less likely to have really serious illness from it. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be giving it. What I'm trying to say is I think we really have to have a much more profound conversation about what is the long-term side effects. Now, your question...
Wait, Doctor... Oh, wait, you were just about to respond to Jamarl's question. Please, go for it.
Yeah. I mean, your question is pointing out what is the real, true risks of side effects. I don't know. I mean, we do see periodically some, shifts in autoimmunity. And is that going to be different in children? The quick trial says no. There were no side effects. But again, there's only a few months that they looked at that. I had several of my friends saying, look, this is I'm not doing this to my kids, but because I feel like I'm completely safe. I have no grandparents in the house. I got vaccinated myself. Even if my child gets mild symptoms and it passes, I'm not going to be at significant risk of getting really sick. What are we doing here? So that's one way to look at this. The other way is going back and saying, look, we got to get this past us, and the kids are going to be part of it because we have to get to herd immunity. My answer to that is very simple. Come on, we have not even been able to vaccinate 20 or 30% of adults simply because no matter what you're going to tell them, they're going to refuse it because they're not going to believe the government. They're not going to believe the science. With that context, how important is it to get all the kids vaccinated or some proportion of it? I don't know. I mean, I think that's the problem.
I could see it. I could see that, being on either side of the column. If you can't do it with the adult population, then why are you putting kids through an unnecessary test? On the other hand, if you need, say, 70% or 75%, whatever the number is, of the population to be vaccinated to achieve official herd immunity, then whatever margins you can get might make a crucial difference when it comes down to it. And that's neither here nor there. That's neither for nor against. Those are attempted impartial comments.
You're absolutely right. And that's exactly the dilemma here.
And now, this also, Dr. Kogan, it seems, I want to revisit one of the things you said earlier and then kind of pivot very slightly, but maybe you get a little bit more personal even. But it seems like you're describing the difference in distance, closeness, in focus between a medical doctor and an epidemiologist. When you describe the moral dilemma of a medical doctor, it is first and foremost not how do I keep this disease from spreading in society, but how do I help my patient? How do I assist my patient? What is the safest thing in a cost-benefit analysis for this individual person? Where epidemiology, you have a sort of distance of statistics where you're able to look at how the disease is going to spread. You see individual people more as nodes in a network than as sort of, patients unto themselves. There's a different a different outlook here. And I'm guessing that the differences in perspective are sort of, I don't know if this makes sense, but making their way through the medical system in terms of the advice that you're getting. And this is where I want to go in terms of recommendations from above, conversations with fellow doctors, and just sort of behind the scenes conversations. What are you looking at? This is a very broad question, but I'm trying to peek behind the veil at how doctors are hearing about how to respond to this crisis, what ideas they're getting. How do you learn whether it's better or worse to vaccinate kids, or whether this new variant is dangerous? How do you take that information in, Dr. Kogan?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly why I can't currently take side, because I feel like I've only started looking at this. I feel like I've looked at the study, I've read a couple of opinions, but I haven't talked to anybody on HW. I haven't talked to Dr. Axelrod, who's kind of our outmost COVID-19 expert. Like I feel like I haven't heard a grand rounds or any kind of a formal presentation to look at all the data summarized by somebody who actually understand the science behind it, not just me reading it as a physician, but not necessarily understanding the nitty-gritty of the study itself in a very fine-grained detail. So I feel like I'm not ready to make the sort of the clear opinion yet, because I want to have more understanding and more information. Now, how we go about this, that's the whole point. I mean, you would do the readings ourselves to what we can, and, then we engage our colleagues, especially those we trust, and especially those who we feel, in a way understand the subject better. And then we also talk to my patients, we have a lot of friends our age who have kids our age. So, I want to, of course, they're going to ask me all these questions. So I need to have some capacity to answer something. And right now I don't feel comfortable because it's so new. And this is a little different, right? I can make a faith jump about my own health, right? And say, I forget it. I'm not going to worry here. I'm just going to take a shot. Why? Well, because I want to get protected. I need to move on with my life. I have to see patients.
And you can sort of say the same thing to your patients. Well, I got it. This is my take. This is what I would do. But with their kids, that's another level of responsibility.
Exactly. And that's why I'm like, I'm going to take way more time.
You're going to take your and that's the thing. I can see we got to go to a break, and we're going to bring you back and pivot to other topics. But I can see this being painted fairly eloquently and persuasive cases being made in both directions. On the one hand, I'll take up sort of more of the opposite side that I've been taking here. This is an untested, basically completely untested experiment on the bulk of a population that we're now rolling out not just to our adult population, but increasingly to the youth, with who knows how many generations of side effects, literally an unprecedented technology in terms of the scale at which we're using mRNA, but also the idea of gene therapy suddenly, which is effectively what this vaccine is. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Kogan. But effectively,
I'm not sure that's really correct in the great scheme. I'm not worried about that part. I'm not worried about that part. That part doesn't concern me much. My understanding is that, quote unquote, as a gene therapy, this is not necessarily something really, there. But we're definitely seeing a shift in the immune system after the vaccines. And while most of them seem to be safe, but there's no argument here that when the shift occurs, you can never predict. There's going to be some proportion of population in which that shift is not going to be necessarily neutral or beneficial. I mean, we are seeing with J&J is a good example, right? That really unusual inflammatory autoimmune condition with drop in platelets, but yet clotting. That's a good example. Now, hopefully there is, and we're not going to see any of this for other vaccines or in this. But in reality, we just don't know.
It's true. Dr. Kogan, we need to go to a break. We'll be back with you in a minute. We are joined by Dr. Mikhail Kogan, the medical director at the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and the founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute. That's a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break, and we'll be back with Dr. Kogan and you on the other side. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We've been having a conversation on the COVID-19, especially with the vaccine being rolled out to kids. I want to get into a conversation on vaccine passports for a moment, but I also want to get into something that came up on the atomic scientists, the bulletin for the atomic scientists. And this is basically the place that counts down the amount to midnight. These guys are top of the line in regards to scientists. And so when they run an ad, I have to pay attention to that ad, or if they run a story, I have to pay attention to that story. Is it possible that we jump to the conclusion on this notion that this will spread human transmission? Now, this is shocking that it's coming from me. I've been very strong on this notion that that is not necessarily true, because up to the longest point, the argument had been made that no, this was something that basically jumped from a bat. And a lot of the stuff could have been attacks on China just because of the competition and everything else. But did we jump to conclusions? I mean, there's a case of a Dutch case where in 2000, they created a virus or a spike protein that only infected cats. Now, if you think about it, that's pretty phenomenal. You've also had viruses escape nearly every year from the various labs. I mean, we're talking about Singapore, we're talking about Taiwan, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's not a situation where it is uncommon. And right here, the safety arrangement in England, so smallpox escaped 3 times from labs in England in 1960s, 1970s, causing 80 cases and 3 deaths. You also have viruses that leaked out of Singapore, Taiwan, and no less than 3 times from the Chinese Institute of Virology in Beijing. The question, did this really start from human transmission, or did it escape from a lab? And why is this conversation taking place right now? To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Dr. Kogan. Dr. Mikhail Kogan is director or medical director at the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and founder and executive director of AIM Health Institute, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the undeserved. Dr. Kogan, again, thank you for joining us. So Dr. Kogan, how do we know that COVID is not a gain of function on some of the virus or some kind of experiment that had been taking place where they added capabilities to some of the virus and it escaped from the lab? The Bulletin for Atomic Scientists, the argument that's in this article is basically that we may have jumped to conclusions and that the industry and that the scientists in this area didn't necessarily want attacks going over the entire field, because it wouldn't have just been China that got attacked. It would have been all of them. And the research that these guys do, like imagine taking a virus, you realize, okay, we need the ability to be able to combat this virus. And so you add functionality to the virus, gain of function. And in doing so, you study, you test, and you try to find ways to deal with it and study it for a larger population. If that gets out, you're going to have problems. And the question is, did this get out? Now, what is that key evidence that is saying that this did not get out of a lab, that this came from human transmission? Why did they immediately jump to that conclusion first? I'm just trying to nail this down.
I don't know. I think the key question that you just asked is exactly this. And frankly, I have not seen a conclusive evidence that could say to the contrary, that indeed, it is the way that mechanism was described. And in fact, you, I'm sure, read some really high-up experts, including people at NIH, saying that, yeah, there is a possibility that indeed this was not intentionally man-made, right, but it is a modified version that just sort of mutated on its own and got out. Honestly, I think that not enough attention has been given to this topic. I've seen several times that the issue came up in the media and then came up at the scientific circles, but it's sort of every time it circulates for a couple of days and then dies out.
Well, they're trying to argue, or they made the point of saying that the arguments against it was that the spike protein binds extremely well to human receptors. I think they say ACE2 receptor. But again, that's in and of itself is not necessarily an argument for it. I mean, if you were altering the virus, you may alter it in a way where it would bind. Otherwise, it wouldn't necessarily bind to the human being at all.
Right.
And there's this other thing about the DNA. And again,
mutations are mutations. Yeah. And, we are actually seeing this virus mutating, right? I mean, they're oldest variants. So this virus mutates. And how do we know for sure that it simply didn't mutate between a experiment in the lab and when it got out and slow? So I think there is a significant probability of that. And I don't know what percent of truth are we actually capable of sort of summing out of all the data that's coming our way from in this conversation. But the reality is I don't think I can make a judgment. Partially, today is a hard day, you guys. You could make a judgment on the new updated vaccine information. And actually, it is showing you the complexity of this specific virus and the way our body interacts with it. I think it's a completely unprecedented situation. So, I mean, part of me actually do think that there's probably some component of a human mistake here in a way. I mean, I don't think that mistake is the way conspiracy theorists want us to believe. No. I disagree with that. But I think the virus has been modified somehow in some form. China, we're presuming in China. We don't even know that for fact, right? I mean, it's just that's the place where it started. But how do we know it sort of started there? I mean, how do we know for a fact it wasn't modified elsewhere and then brought in? Yeah. Somehow.
Which is some theories in China that this is originally coming out of the United States. But I mean, you mentioned people at a high level. Under Trump, Robert Redfield, who was the director of the CDC under Trump, he said he believes the WHO team that went out and worked in China is wrong, and that instead this was a result of gain-of-function research, that this was man-made, or at least man-modified. And we've talked about that on the show before. And it's a credit to hear you say that you're not sure, but that you're open to the idea that it could be from there, because that's basically where I am, and clearly you're more qualified to have an opinion on it. It seems hard to tell generally. I'm going to pivot right now. I want to go to the role of oxygen, and specifically oxygen concentrators. I'll put it like this: last summer, during the earlier stages of the pandemic, when it was getting worse in its first real big wave, I'm talking about the summer wave, around June of last year. There was a turning point where what had been given as the frontline treatment, ventilators, where you supply oxygen to people who are suffering the worst effects of COVID-19, suddenly I started to hear things that basically they could increase the likelihood of death. And there was a bit of correlation versus causation confusion here, because it could just be that you're putting people who are very sick on ventilators who are effectively on their way out anyway, to say it quite brutally. Or it could be that it actually causes it. So it could be causal, or it could be correlated with it. Now, that was about the last time that I'd heard on ventilators. We also had a dramatic undersupply of them, and so the focus shifted towards, mask use and vaccination. Anyway, it has now come back with the crazy, huge wave going on in India right now.
Right.
They've been running big shortages of oxygen concentrators and big shortages of oxygen. They've been getting donations from around the world to help there. How is oxygen used at this point? And if there's a consensus on it medically in treating COVID-19, how do you use it? Is it useful, Dr. Kogan?
Right. Well, so finally, out of all today's topic, there's one topic that I can give you some clarity on. So there are two different things. So there's no question that oxygen is critical. And the reason for that is that, you can think of when lungs are affected in COVID, you can think of it as in a way, in sort of a lay terms, that the person feels suffocated, drowning. And the reason for that is not just that the lungs directly affected, but the fact is that the exchange of gases is affected dramatically. So giving the oxygen to that, and there's a complete clear scientific agreement on this, saves lives. The problem was that giving oxygen through the pressured mechanical ventilator in a standard position, what's called, when somebody laying on their back, turned out to actually be negative. So it actually was harmful. Now, that does not mean that we're not giving oxygen. We're giving oxygen, but we're not giving it through the standard ventilation. So there are different ways to give concentrated oxygen. You can give it through different types of supplies where it's not, you don't have an endotracheal tube, or the tube that goes down the throat to pressure the oxygen in. That's what was partially causing the problems. So, and then, what's going on in India is criminal because the oxygen is not a rocket science, right? I mean, you can think of ventilator as not far off of rocket science. It's a very complex device, and they're expensive. They take time to be made. But oxygen supply shouldn't be that. I mean, they should have access to oxygen supply for anybody who needs it. And then the oxygen itself is clearly still a critical part of an intensive care unit management of anybody who ends up there with COVID. So that I can answer quickly and simply.
But before we close, we're about to close. If looking at India, looking at Brazil, I mean, even the cases in Mexico, what is your big concern here? From a global standpoint, looking at COVID, looking at, based on what you know, based on what you've seen up to this point, what is your concern going forward in these cases?
Well, I think for me, it feels to me that every few weeks, we have another center of epidemic. Right. What scares me the most is not only that we have, and they're significant, like, look, now we have it in our own country, right? So the state of Washington is now having the fourth spike. What to me it means is something a bit more concerning that says, look, hopefully the vaccine will eventually be effective enough to stop this reoccurrences. But the virus keeps mutating. I mean, are we going to constantly play this game of tag, and we're going to be creating this very complex epidemiological structures where we're going to predict where it's going to try to occur, going to try to put resources there? But the reality is, if you think about this sounds pretty scary. We are constantly having the locations where it appears, and I'm sure that short of completely shutting that area down, we're going to have people traveling from there, and it's going to keep spreading, and those new variants are going to be reintroduced. So I'm not too worried about specific management of disease from medical perspective. We know what the tools are. We drop mortality down. But look, you have basically a third world country in a sense getting impacted by it, and now what? And you have basically just a criminal situation where people dying needlessly, and it's just it's not just sad. It feels like, how could this be happening in 2021, right? That the oxygen supply is not there in a large country with a good amount of resources. So, and that, to me, that's what's really
a travesty of this.
To see. Yeah, it's and I have a bad feeling we haven't seen the last of it. It's going to keep coming back to us in circles this way, each time highlighting a specific weakness in our own, not just in our own healthcare, but in our own sort of internal capacity to deal with the infections and have our own immune system in a good place. Like, remember we talked in the beginning all about vitamin D?
Right.
Well, guess what? I can't really quite fathom then in India, everybody's vitamin D deficient being in the sun all day long. So
interesting.
It's infinitely more complex.
That is very interesting. The issue may not just be something to take. It may be something that we must do as human beings in order to kind of keep ourselves up against the stuff in general. I mean, that eventually, I think that in decades from now, we'll realize that the illness, in a way, in highlighting some of these issues and the requirement for us as a society to say enough of studying diseases only. We've got to start studying the health and how to stay healthy. We're not putting enough resources in this. 30 seconds. And one last question. There's been studies that they will look back at famine, for example. And let's say over the course of, multiple generations, they would still be able to see the famine in the context of the person's, I guess, genetics or something, where they could say, okay, during this particular time, these people had a particular famine, and we know this because this gene line and these people stayed in this particular area in the medical records are there. What do you think this is going to show up as? I mean, be it either the vaccine or either the illness itself, or will this show up and later on in regards to some kind of health issue? Meaning, is this going to be cop and robber? where the disease pops up, disease, vaccine, and it's the same cat and mouse with the same virus. And what does this look like on us as humanity, as human beings going forward, let's say in 2 or 3 generations? Or does this not show up in our genetics at all? Like, it seems more significant than it is.
I think it will show up. I don't know what form it will show up, and it's really not my place. I'm not a geneticist. I don't know if I can. It's a great question. I don't know if I can answer it directly. But what I tell you, what I think immediately going to show up is as the mass of people getting through the illness coming out on the other end is increasing, we're going to see an unprecedented amount of this post-viral state that people are going to have for years to come when healthcare system is completely unprepared to handle. I mean, this is already obvious. We're already dealing with this.
You're talking about long COVID. You're talking about the symptoms that people, symptoms that people get after they've contracted COVID-19. But we're not talking weeks after. We're talking months or potentially years.
Months? No, more than a year now. I've now seen several patients who are coming in. It's been more than a year, and they're just as sick as when they started.
And the idea is that that's sort of permanently adding a certain level of treatment just across the bulk of the population who got it.
There you go. So, and that is not only is it a scary proposition, but it's also even scarier because we don't even have those treatments yet. So, like, there's not, and trying to say, look, we're going to develop more drugs to it is also just simply highlighting the reality that this model itself is wrong. The way that we think of a model, the illness, the treatment is wrong. You have to put in the question in there, what is the cause of this illness? Why is the person A got this and got so sick, and person B didn't? And until we learn to understand that and say, now, how do we take the person A who got the illness, fine-tune them so they're more like person B? And I think a lot of it we already know. I mean, stress plays a huge role. There's so many things we already understand in there. And that's what's coming into the playing field is that we are now faced with an unprecedented reality that before we could ignore it often. I mean, there are patients that had some other problems coming into us, and we sort of, in a way, were supporting them, but not really addressing the core underlying concern. But now we're going to be pushed to in unprecedented situations, and the model is going to come from the sort of a grass field from underground to say, look, forget the medicine for a second.
Spoken like a true medical director of a Center for Integrative Medicine, by the way. You're talking about how we need to bring together these diverse theories of how the human body works and actually understand what makes us different, how we respond to stress, how we respond to various life events. That does sound characteristic, but Dr. Kogan, we need to describe your voice as we go out in this segment, the voice that everyone was listening to there. Dr. Mikhail Kogan, the medical director of the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and the founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute. That's a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved and maybe some undeserved as well. Dr. Kogan, thank you for joining us. Great conversation, as always. We're going into a break, taking your calls when we come back. 202-521-1320 is the number. Again, that is 202-521-1320. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are now in a taking your calls type of segment. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, that is 202-521-1320. 1320. You're listening to Fault Lines. Real quick, we got 2 callers on the line, but I want to give you a bit of information about where you can find us. We are on the radio in Washington, D.C., 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. Also on in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. And if you like what Jamarl and I are doing here, if you like the show we host, please give it a watch and a share on YouTube. Just do a search for Fault Lines Radio over on the YouTube channel. Also, if you would so kindly, go over to twitter.com/faultlinesradio. You will find us there. You can like us. You can follow us. You can hate us. You can do whatever you do on Twitter, but we are there for that relationship. We got calls, and we're taking more, 202-521-1320. Let us go directly to Tarif, calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
How y'all doing? Thanks for taking my call. First, I got 3 comments. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange. The first comment is dealing with ex-Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad. He registered for the June elections. You know what I'm saying? So he's a candidate that might can win it and become president again. And you know him, he like the world stage. He like to talk a lot of smack too, like Trump. So, and the second, Harley Slangler from the LaRouche group saying that we need a world Medicaid for all type of thing where we can treat each other when ailments like this pops up, because it's going to continue to pop up, you know, as the human race grows. You need medicines to treat each other. You just can't hoard medicines just because you want to. You just got to produce enough to treat the whole world, and we need a silk world, a medical silk road to treat the whole world. You know what I'm saying? My last comment is dealing with I forgot his name. The guy was on before, but I just thank God. Yeah, Hogan. I remember Alex Jones saying something like, I don't really take everything what Alex Jones say, but I remember when he said something that made sense and say, Indonesia, why so many people was dying in Indonesia, they was vitamin D efficient. The reason why they was vitamin D efficient is because you have a thing where they wear, even though they're in the sun, they wear clothes that cover the whole body because they don't want to get dark.
For protection from the sun.
Yeah, from the sun. So what happened is there was like 90% of Indonesians was vitamin D deficient.
It's a Muslim country too, right?
Yeah, and also, it's a Muslim country too.
So
and also India. And India is the same way. I just saw an article, because when he brought it up, I said, wait a minute. I remember seeing India, but anyway, they have an article from India saying that India is 70 to 90% vitamin D deficient.
Interesting. Wait, I just want to, we got one more caller, Tarif, but you brought up Alex Jones. Was he just, you brought him up, and so I wanted to tie that thread up. Was he talking about Indonesia? Is that why you brought that up?
No, he was talking about India.
Oh.
But India, I see. He was, Colgan was talking about
India, and how he thought that it was vitamin D deficiencies, but it could be something like you're saying, where I don't know. That's an interesting addition to that. Tarif, thank you for the call. We got Michael calling in from Sydney. Michael, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi guys. I think the elephant in the room that you guys didn't bring up, and Dr. Richard Cogan didn't bring up either, is like, why are we vaccinating people if we're going to worry about them getting sick from people who have COVID? I mean, the point of having a vaccination is you don't get sick from the disease, or if you do get sick, it's very mild and it shouldn't kill you. I mean, why would you run out and test an experimental vaccine on your son or your daughter, even yourself, right? And I mean, by forcing people to take it, it's basically experimental medicine. I mean, they're forcing people to take it. That's problematic in itself, right? And you're going to demand passports, or you're going to have to take the vaccine to do anything. I mean, this is forcing people to take an experimental drug. You have to get permission for that. You don't have to be forced into doing it. And if we are vaccinating people, surely we shouldn't be worried about getting reinfected. If we are worried about getting reinfected, what's the point of taking the vaccine? And if your grandparents don't want to get infected, let them take the vaccine. If you don't want to get kids to do it, don't get your kids to do it. You shouldn't have any pressure to give your kids or yourself an experimental medication, right? That doesn't even prove to work.
Well, but it seems, Michael, it seems like we're, like, the pressure comes from the environment. There's this pressure because we're responding to a disease that
wiped 600,000 people off the face of this country.
Yeah, in the United States alone, and over 3 million deaths around the world. I mean, it's not a small thing. So different countries are responding in different ways to it, obviously. With kids, though, I think where the stick would come in, where it could get messy, is okay. Is a vaccine required for your kid to go to school in person? You know, is that literally not just going out to a concert or something, where vaccine passports, whether they're in New York or the EU or Mumbai, the idea is okay. That's a sort of voluntary activity. But if you suddenly need to get a vaccine to go back to school, and you're a 10-year-old kid or whatever, and your parents are having to make that decision, that's where that conversation gets really messy, because that's where there is a direct need and obligation imposed. Michael, we will be coming back to that topic. Thank you for the call. I want to thank everybody for listening this hour. We'll be back in a minute with another hour of today's show and headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition, the last hour this morning, of the most disruptive show. We cover news, events, politics, and more from across these disunited states of America in the increasingly fragmented and battled surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. Whether you're just joining us or you have been with us for the whole 2+ hours so far, I hope you're having a wonderful morning. Let's get into the headlines. First up, in COVID news, more than 340,000 new COVID cases. Pardon me. No, more than 34,000. Oh my God. More than 34,088 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with just under 700 new deaths. One digit makes a difference. I just realized, at 340,000, that's insane. We've had an average of 38,135 cases per day. Oops. 34,088 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, with just under 700 new deaths. Over the past week, there has been an average of 38,135 cases per day. That's a decrease of 29% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 35% of the American public has been fully vaccinated. That's up, a bit over a third. 46% of residents have received at least one dose, and as of this morning, the coronavirus has infected a total of more than 32,806,000 people in the United States, and it has killed a total of about 582,362 people. More than 250,000 people have been confirmed to have died from the coronavirus in India, which just saw upwards of 348,420 cases. That's a big number. That is the 340,000 some odd size number. And a record 4,205 deaths, both on Wednesday. A variant of the virus that was first detected in India, B.1.617, has been spreading and has now been found in a total of 49 countries. It was upgraded on Monday to a variant of concern by the World Health Organization for its ability to spread more quickly and for its potential resistance to some antibodies. Britain's economy has contracted 1.5% compared to the previous quarter, although it has returned to growth this March with about 2.1% growth, all, of course, in large part due to a combination of the lockdown and the Brexit process, which have sort of synergized to cause some damage there. Anyway, in national political news back here in the United States, some gas pumps are running dry in the southeast U.S., with 16% of stations empty in South Carolina and 1 out of 10 empty in Georgia and Florida. This comes after the Colonial Pipeline was shut down after being the subject of a ransomware cyber attack. Robert Long is facing murder charges and hate crimes for his mid-March murder massacre spree in Fulton County, Georgia, where he killed nearly 10 women. The district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia, is seeking the death penalty, and this would be the first test of new hate crime legislation passed by Georgia's legislature. Liz Cheney delivered a defiant speech yesterday in advance of a vote by Republicans today to vacate her seat as the House Republican Conference chair. This comes as a battle for the future and the leadership of the Republican Party. Pennsylvania's Attorney General warned against ghost guns, with Republican Senator Ted Cruz warning against those trying to take away ghost guns, saying that ghost guns are a non-issue and that Democrats want to, quote, trace every gun in America, end quote. In international news, military bombardments by Israel against Palestinians and by Hamas against Israelis has continued. Those bombardments have grown to their heaviest levels in recent years. At least 35 Palestinians and 6 people in Israel have died since Monday. In related news, Israel's police commissioner says there's been an unprecedented level of violence between Israeli Arabs and Israelis, with the action in some cities resembling a civil war. Groups protesting both for and against the Israelis and the Palestinians have been taking to the streets in recent days in Israel and the United States and other countries. The country of Pakistan has called on Muslim nations to condemn Israel's actions and stand by the Palestinians, with Qatar and Egypt saying they're working on a possible ceasefire. A survey conducted by an American business group shows that upwards of 40% of those living in Hong Kong are thinking of moving, with 62% of those saying they're moving, citing concerns about the new national security law and the influence of Beijing. In Afghanistan, officials say that a second district has now been taken by Islamist militants in the last week. In tech news, the air company Airbus is having to stand trial for manslaughter for a crash 12 years ago that killed 228 people. In Earth and Science news, the Voyager 1 satellite has submitted a report, or at least a report has been written about it. It is reporting a faint, unidentified humming sound from the interstellar medium. The interstellar medium is the largely vacuous zone between solar systems. And this faint humming is coming from that region. They're trying to work out the cause. You're listening to Headlines on Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And by the way, we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Manila Chan. We are going to be talking about the contest between Liz Cheney and the rest of the Republican Party effectively. But I guess you can say Kevin McCarthy and Liz Cheney specifically. Those are the two sort of people most in the ring at this point. We're also going to be talking, because Manila has been looking into this and is interested in it. We're going to be talking about the Colonial Pipeline shutdown and the hacking with her. She's been watching that closely. So that'll be in about 10 minutes now. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But those are the headlines once again. Jamarl, I've got to say, one thing that I have in the studio that I didn't have at home, and you can't hear it as a listener, but you probably know what I'm talking about. I can hear myself talking over the headphones as I'm talking. And that was really weird for the first day or two.
Just turn it up.
You could turn it up. You could turn it down. If I turn it up, I would be overpowered. No, but I can hear myself over the headphones. You don't understand. It's not just that I can hear myself talking. It's that I can hear the reverberation of my own voice. And it is an upsetting experience, but I'm getting used to it.
Yeah, you get familiar with it. You get familiar with it. It's slightly weird, but it's okay.
You can hear every intonation of yours. And I don't know that I want to.
Yeah.
But not of yours, of mine, of course. But no, it's just a weird feeling.
It's just a very strange feeling. Like people, the first time I was in the studio, yes, it's a very weird feeling. Your dad attacked me the first time I was in the studio. I think I've told the story before. We were arguing about something, and he turns around and he goes after me, and it's like, it's a weird experience. Yeah, he's like pointing. And
he's
like,
pointing.
What just took place? What's happening here? It's a very heady feeling. And so it's like next time it's like, all right, lay in wait. It's like you're just prepared at that point. But you get used to it. You get more accustomed to going back and forth and stuff like that. But it's an interesting experience for people who've been, with the headphones on, everything else on.
You can't see it, and you especially can't hear it. But for folks listening, in the Sputnik recording studio, we actually have a little display case kind of hidden under the table that's filled with maces and swords and other, blunt instruments, so that if you get into a fight, if you really want to get into a fight, you can just reach down under there, pull out a mace, start bludgeoning at each other. That's only happened on fault lines, by the way.
Oh, really?
Somebody's head got taken off.
Very nice.
But
that must be beside the alcohol bottle, just down there where people can chill out after.
Exactly. No, that is all fake news. But
I was looking at this story, the Voyager 1 thing. What do you think that is? Do you think
space whales, man? I led with that.
Space whales.
I will not be the first, but I'll be one of the first to say space whales, and I will be the last one to stop saying space whales when it's revealed inevitably as not being space whales.
You're going to stand by the space
I'm
whales?
going to stand by the space whales.
You never know. Maybe there is something that's living in space that is animal life.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be weird?
Yeah. And if you think about it, a whale is the most logical shape for that animal to take.
Exactly. Exactly. Especially if it's in a vacuum of space. Actually, I think it would be a circle if it's anything in a vacuum of space. Just because things tend to go to the lowest energy level, that's what planets tend to big circles.
Do you remember there's something about a spherical cow? There's a line about a spherical cow. But just imagine a spherical cow for a second. A cow that's shaped perfectly like a sphere. This is an established thing. There was some teacher, I'm sure somebody knows this who's listening to me. But or
it
a
makes
whale.
hamburgers easier.
What'd you say?
Makes hamburgers easier.
It makes measuring a cow a lot easier. I'll put it like that.
Genetics, man.
Yeah.
That's like you can make your own cow that's already shaped like a hamburger. You don't even have to go through the whole part of cutting a cow.
We start with mRNA.
Right.
We move on to CRISPR.
Right. By the way, the conversation with Kogan on the lab stuff, I was one of those people who was like, yeah, this didn't come out of a lab. But who am I? Right? I'm not an immunologist. The only thing I'm pulling from is like just define like, this did not come out of a lab.
And now it's the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists.
Yeah.
They've won you over.
They've won.
I've been trying for months on a low grade basis.
I am open to it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It's like, I don't, like, most of the time, I'm neither 1 or 0. I'm just kind of, it's like, all right, that's, has a potential to be true or potential to be false, and I lean more towards this more likely true.
That's the space to be.
Yeah, but unless I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, because it really could, like the explanation that they gave for why it didn't come out of a lab was entirely political. Like it wasn't like they were saying, oh, well, the DNA was structured in a way. It's like, yeah, but if somebody made that, I mean, they would be using the same tactics. It's like, well, the spike protein just really has an affinity for humanity. Yeah, but if you made that, wouldn't you make it in a way that the lab would, you know what I mean? It's like the things that they explain away don't really explain away anything. It just makes it more gray.
Yeah.
And, it's not like they found the intermediary transitory state where it's like, okay, this is the missing link for it, or they found the area where this, they don't know any of that stuff. All of that stuff is just taken as conjecture of some level that, well, it escaped an animal, and so there has to be a transitory animal somewhere. It's that. But it's not like, okay, here's the bird, here's the bat, here's the roach, that's not there. And so it's like, I can't just, stay with the previous opinion of, okay, this didn't come out of a lab. Because my problem is, oftentimes, it's this disassociation between what is an attack on China,
yes,
from a financial, from an economic, or from a political standpoint, versus, okay, what's real? And those are different things sometimes. And so, meaning China is not, encased in glory and, no, their government is like every other government. They lie, they're deceptive, and, these guys may be doing to the very extent. But on something like this, where it would look bad, people would be annoyed and angry, and there are so many deaths. And then, there was this great fight between Fauci and Rand Paul the other day. Rand Paul, who's a doctor, go after Fauci on this notion about whether or not the stuff escapes from a lab. And Fauci could not defend himself all that great on this, meaning he doesn't know. The honest answer is we don't know.
That's the honest, objective answer.
That's the honest answer.
Even after, and particularly after the WHO report came out, which concluded, to be clear, that it wasn't from China, that this was a naturally occurring virus that was not a product of gain of function research. But like all science, that is a sort of step forward in a certain direction along a road. Yes. It doesn't suggest that you've already reached your destination.
Right.
Yeah, that's not to say that you should, assign a probability of 1 of absolute certainty to it.
Yes.
You're in that space. No, and we've been talking about this for a while. Rand Paul and Fauci have really been going at it in different ways.
Which does not like Fauci.
Well, maybe not, but it's also a spectacle. It is spectacular. They've made it. It's a theatrical thing where it's in a weird way, you make politics. Trump was a reality TV show host, which prepared him to be a politician. And now, in some sense, I think the politicians are just reading off, okay, what would make an interesting media appearance? What would be interesting reality TV? Which is functionally what it is if you have the news media becoming an entertainment business and politicians
functioning within the context of that.
Exactly, fitting themselves into that process. So anyway, Rand Paul, Fauci, arguing about this stuff. There's legitimate disagreement there, but I can't help but feel that they're both right and they're both wrong. Like I can't help but feel that Fauci is too willing to defend things he shouldn't be, whether it was whether it was the masks originally, or whether it's this, various levels of certainty that seem unjustified about where the virus came from or how to treat it, all these things. And at the same time, I support the response to COVID, and I have a lot of the same concerns that Rand Paul does. But it feels like he has a bit too much conviction that Fauci is 100% wrong.
Yes.
And maybe I just wish there were more nuance in the political process and less people yelling at each other and less of that being the thing that everybody wanted to see. But I'm just screaming into the wind there.
I don't know. I mean, Rand Paul is such an ideological actor. Libertarian, so this notion of mask. How dare you tell me what I'm supposed to, put on my face? That's liberty. It's liberty. I have the liberty to die and get people infected with COVID like anybody else, any other red-blooded American. Whereas Fauci, is the complete opposite of that from the medical part, where they care less about your liberties. I mean, having to deal with doctors, it's like these guys have this idea in their heads that what they do matters more than everything else, missing the point that, no, dude, you're being paid just like my barber or just like my, pedicurist or whatever else. Your job may be to keep me alive, but at the end of the day, you're just a hired bloke just like everybody else. Your opinion is subordinate to the main thing, meaning Fauci's opinion, while important, is subordinate to whatever the society deems is necessary in the moment. And so when you get to a point where the number of viruses and that stuff goes down, Fauci's opinion is going to matter less. In this very specific instance, though, Fauci's still a doctor. And Fauci, in his point of view, I would wager, cares less about your ability to do things, ability to act and to engage and everything else, and cares more about health being one of the highest priorities. And so these two are never going to get along, and especially not on this issue. And you're right. The issue is probably, the answer is probably somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Like, there are times where I am more heavy, like, that guy's wrong, that guy's right. But on this one, it seems to be more dubious. It's neither one of them know, period. And so it's like having this huge fight over, no, it came from a lab. No, it didn't come from a lab. Neither one of you guys. And the answer is just in the air of sorts. And whereas they may be able to do an investigation, can you expect the answer to that investigation to be earnest? I mean, think of the OPCW. Think of sometimes these investigations that take place that seem more political in regards to the thing, whereas really there's a scientific answer to it. And unfortunately, science has become a political thing. So climate change, which is dealing with the environment, becomes, well, that's going to adversely affect all of these companies. It's like, yeah, dude, life. Yeah, but it's going to adversely affect those companies. Like, that stuff gets coded. So wearing a mask becomes a political thing as opposed to a viral thing. Very strange. And the way this stuff is broken down. But let's do this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with the one and only Manila Chan. Back in a moment. Fault Lines.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. An intense conversation, January 6th. People raiding the Capitol. Screams, Trump, 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 echoing outside. A cop not beat to death by protesters with a sign. Fire extinguishers going off. People roaming the Capitals. An intense conversation between House Republican head Kevin McCarthy and Donald Trump. They hear him say, "Who the F do you think you're talking to?" Now, this all started when all of these people raided the Capitol. McCarthy is calling Trump, begging him to basically call off his supporters. And Trump says, "Well, Kevin, I guess these people are more upset about the election than you are," Trump says. This did not go over well with McCarthy, who did basically say that Donald Trump was responsible for it. Right here, he should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding, McCarthy said. These facts require immediate action by President to accept his share of responsibility to quell the brewing unrest and to ensure President-elect Biden is able to successfully begin his term. And yet, that same McCarthy that was pretty perturbed when those Trump supporters were trying to invade the building is now a new course. McCarthy is now backing Trump and doing so over one Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney has voted with Trump closely, probably than pretty much any other Republican, and yet on the one item to which she is not with Trump on, the big lie, as she calls it, that has been enough to remove her from her spot in Republican leadership. Let's play the clip of the cowardly Republican McCarthy. Let's play the clip.
No, any member can take whatever position they believe in. That's what the voters vote on the individuals, and they make that decision. What we're talking about is a position in leadership. We are in one of our biggest battles ever for this nation and the direction whether this next century will be ours. As conference chair, you have one of the most critical jobs of the messenger of going forward. Are we talking about what the Democrats are doing on the border? Are we talking about all the missed jobs report that we just had? Are we building an economy? We were watching Joe Biden create inflation that we've never seen before, a takeover of government, the rising of taxes, the damage of what will be done that we cannot come back for. That's why we need a conference that's united. That's why we need a conference chair that is delivering that message day in and day out and uniting the nation to make sure that we are on the right footing going forward.
Do you support Elise Stefanik for that job?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I do. Stefanik for the job being Liz Cheney's job. To have a conversation about what is going on in the Republican Party. What is the Republican Party? What does it stand for? Not just what it stands for. Does it not have space for the likes of Cheney? In order to have a conversation about this, we're joined with Manila Chan. She's a veteran news anchor and host of RT America's daily news program, In Question, one of my favorite shows on RT, actually. Manila, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us again.
Hey, guys. Good to be with you. Before we dive into this whole Cheney-McCarthy war, can I just quickly address something from the last segment?
Go for it.
Jamarl, the most surprising thing from the last segment was that you have a pedicurist. Bravo, modern man. I just want to put that out there. I think that's awesome.
Well, I love pedicures and manicures. When I was younger, not so much. When I was younger, it was like, oh, somebody's touching my body in this kind of weird way. As I got older, I realized, that's insane. Like men that don't get that, you're lost, buddy. You're lost.
You men need to go out there and learn. I swear there would be less wars and less fighting if men would just go out there and do a self-care day, get a massage, get your feet pedicured. You will be way more zen before you go back to the negotiating table.
Preach. Jamarl, Manila, I'm not sure about this.
Really?
Literally the only way that I would be willing to do a pedicure is the fish that like nibble on your feet.
Oh, those are disgusting.
That's pretty manly in its own way.
You think that's pretty manly?
I'd be getting mauled by wild beasts. and that's how I clean myself. No, I'm just kidding. Manila, I think that would potentially
It'll chill out a lot of people, man. I mean, it's so zen. It's like you're just somebody is working on it. You're feeling great after it. Sometimes you get the face thing. My wife and I, when we were in, man, this is an aside. When we were in, I believe it was Barcelona. My wife saw this thing where they put you on this like stone slab. And somebody like scrubs you down with like soap. It's like you're an animal.
Like a good sacrifice.
Have you seen that?
It sounds like a good setup for a sacrifice.
Right, I know, right?
What do you a stone slab in there? I don't know, Jamarl.
It's just weird. I can't think of the name of it. But it's like they put you on a slab, and then this person like throws water on you, and then they scrub you with this huge loofah sponge, and it's like one adult scrubbing another adult.
Is it public?
It's no, it's not public. It's I can't think of the name of it. It's like some kind of, it's not Turkish, but it's like one of those type of things. Yeah, it's like a bathhouse. She saw it online. She was like, I have to go to this. Now, personally, I think she saw the Arab gentleman that was there that was very cut and good looking, who was basically scrubbing the woman on the video, right? I think she saw that. And she was like, I'm going to see that guy.
It sounds like Mesopotamian S&M or something like that. This is a little bit too heavy. I don't know that I can take this, Manila.
It was good. It was a lot of fun. It was weird. It was awkward, but it was good. It was fun.
I swear this would probably solve the McCarthy
It would.
fight.
It would. I don't know.
Put the two of them in a bathhouse. Let them both come out kind of zen, scrubbed, nice shiny skin. They're all happy. They're all exfoliated, and then talk it out. Right?
You think that would be the thing where like they would bring down hostilities, etc.
Yes.
Well, Liz Cheney is feeling herself. Now, I think if it wasn't for the Cheney dynasty, this would never take place. Because I think it takes a certain degree of gravitas, or at the very least, self-perception of gravitas, that allows an individual to hold their shape against what is seemingly the entire party taking shots at her, vocally taking shots at her. And not just like in the, behind the scenes on Fox News, all of these guys telling her to shut up. What's his name? Lindsey Graham comes out. It's like, I like Liz, but Liz needs to, take a back seat on this one. Trump is the party. Like these guys. And what's wild about it, I keep pointing out, she's voted with Trump almost more than any other Republican. It's not the voting. Yeah. It's what you're saying. Like right here, she says, remaining silent and ignoring the lie emboldens the liar. I would not participate in that. I would not sit back and watch in silence while others lead the party down a path that abandons the rule of law and joins the former president's crusade to undermine democracy. Is she right on that, Manila? I think she is.
Well, I do personally. I do agree with her statement. However, I don't want to place a value judgment on what's right, what's wrong, so much as I want to kind of paint the picture for the viewers about what's happening. So the vote is underway right now. Mm-hmm. They might have. I'm getting updates now that they might have just completed the vote. We don't know what those results are yet, but this is the second attempt.
Right, the first one she lived through was a secret ballot that she survived.
But back then, Kevin McCarthy, as you pointed out, did back her. He has now flipped positions. We don't know what flipped that switch. But today, another private caucus vote to oust her.
Cowardice.
Yesterday on Capitol Hill, she stood on her hill and is willing to die on her cross. Mm-hmm. She called Trump a liar, a threat to democracy. That backing him risked more violence. I'm not sure necessarily that she's referring to more violence on Capitol Hill. I think she's referring to violence in general. But I think the key barometer to reading the tea leaves here is going to be looking at Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican in Georgia, who wears all those crazy masks or whatever. She's been the barometer, I think, for the Republican Party this year, or at least for the past fiscal cycle.
That's terrifying.
She has had enormous cash flow and support to her campaign. Apparently, Trumpism is good for your finances. She is the second biggest fundraiser, get this, to Nancy Pelosi. In Q1 of this year, a non-election year, Marjorie Taylor Greene garnered $3.2 million this year.
Serious?
This year alone, yes, to her campaign coffers.
That goofball is bringing in that much money?
The QAnon associated Congresswoman. Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know who's paying all that money. I don't know if it's small donors. I mean, I haven't gone down that rabbit hole. But what that tells you is that her line of thinking is very popular among the GOP.
So, Manila, what is Liz Cheney standing up for or standing up to exactly? Do you feel, and this is not just an attempt at psychoanalysis or something like that, but I'm trying to read the winds of the Republican Party, trying to look at which way things are going, what the factions are, trying to understand what who's pushing it in what direction. Obviously, there's Trump, but you're talking about this new larger movement. Is Liz Cheney doing this out of ideological defiance? Is she doing it out of some sort of self-serving political interest that she wants to take it in another direction? Who is she representing here? Is she actually standing on her own, the last never Trumper, effectively? Is it ideological or
what is it, Romney?
I guess so. But Manila, what do you think?
Look, this is not a value judgment. This is me just observing what's happening down the road on Capitol Hill. Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney are a dying breed, and they represent a dying breed of 2021 GOP. I think fewer and fewer people back that. And you know what? Similarly, the Democratic Party has shifted further left, right, they've shifted further left over the past, 10, 15 years since we saw Bernie Sanders take a lot more prominence. So the Democrats have shifted further left, and the Republicans, I wouldn't even say that they shifted right. They kind of, because I don't know where to put the Trumpism, right? I don't know that it's not exactly, they've not gotten more conservative. They've gotten more Trumpian.
Yeah.
So the rest of the party has kind of shifted in this, I don't know, obtuse angle, I guess, since you guys were talking about math earlier. They've shifted in this obtuse angle, and it's not exactly traditional conservative, which is what Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney, that dying breed, that old school Republican Party from the 80s and 90s, that doesn't exist out in the real world anymore. There are very few people that think that. The Republican Party now either are the young modern Republicans who also kind of lean Trump, but they're also a lot more socially liberal, I think, than their forefathers. But someone like Cheney, who represents her father's values, mind you, she's raised by Dick Cheney, she represents the old school conservatives who never saw a war that they didn't fall in love with, right? She represents that. The new GOP, I think, is slightly different. Trumpism isn't necessarily into war. He has a whole different tactic towards foreign policy. But I would compare that similarly to the Democrats moving in a different direction over the past 30 years as well. So who she represents is a dying breed. Those people are not even going to vote for her anymore because they don't exist anymore. So I foresee this vote that just took place. I think there are a lot of people who are going to vote against her. I think this is a private family matter that they're duking it out behind closed doors. But given her speech yesterday, everybody except Ken Buck from Colorado sat through her speech. Everybody else stood up when she took the podium and walked out. So I think that is the death march for Liz Cheney.
That is brutal. I see this gets to the conversation Shane and I often have, where it's like, it's not always back and forth. Sometimes one side just loses. And in this case, it seems like they just lost. Like the Republican Party of Romney, of Cheney, of these guys, they seem to have just lost. I mean, whatever it is that was Trump, because if you think about it, think back to the primaries with Donald Trump. You had 19, 20 Republicans, all of them lose. And it's like, they're like, oh, this guy's a clown. This guy's a carnival barker. There's no way this guy could ever win. Oh my God, this guy's president. And then not just, oh my God, this guy's president. He is the gravity of the party. And then the secondary question is, well, what does that mean? What does it mean? I mean, is it just whatever comes off of Trump's ego, or is there some kind of tea leaves here to read in order to discern what it means to be Trump? I do think there seems to be this kind of question about war. There's that. Trump during the campaign was saying like $10 an hour minimum wage. So he doesn't even necessarily seem to be entirely against stuff like that. Like, what does it mean to be a Trump Republican.
Can I cut in here real quick?
Go for it.
The news just broke. Liz Cheney is out, y'all. Goodbye,
Wow.
Liz Cheney.
Breaking news. Liz
Breaking
Cheney
news.
is out.
Yeah, thank you, Manila.
So what? Elise Stefanik.
Elise Stefanik.
Stefanik.
She's a newcomer to New York.
She's from New York. Yeah.
She
And
is
a moderate.
Exactly. Yeah, she is a moderate.
And a moderate.
I would say she's the example that I kind of mentioned of the younger generation GOP. I'm not even sure that she's even 40, but she's on the younger side of the GOP spectrum, right? When you consider the GOP, you usually think gray-haired, gray-suit men.
Same with Marjorie Taylor Greene, also
Younger.
a younger woman. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
a much younger woman. So
I want to come
that's
back,
the
Manila. I want to go
direction.
back to Jamarl's question because I was thinking of asking almost exactly the same thing. The Republican Party is dead. Long live the Republican Party. Right. You have one, the leadership effectively changing seats with Trump, clearly the person heading the way. But you've got these other examples, whether it's Elise Stefanik, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Who were we talking about? Kim Iverson the other day. Ron DeSantis of Florida.
Yeah.
She was putting him as a class of politicians.
Republican barrow.
Yeah, you might put Matt Gaetz into that category. There are a number of
Trumpian
politicians.
Republican. Another one.
Yeah, but here's the thing. What is Trump? It's been years of trying to define Trumpism or Trump's politics, Trump's policy. Do we know more about Trumpism in 2021 than we did in 2016 or 2017? Manila, if we do, what is it?
One word: erratic.
That's the thing. That's the thing. In some ways, it feels like I'm less confident that I know what Trump is going to want to do on any given day than I was half a decade ago.
Okay, look, the surprise is the key driver in the art of the deal. I'm not saying everybody should go out there and read the book, but surprise is one of the main things that Trump talked about. Mind you, a ghostwriter wrote that for him, but I'm sure Trump had a little say in how the book was written, but that was one of his key elements to how he negotiates, is to keep your opponent on their toes.
But that is not a policy agenda. That's not a policy. Manila, that's the. It's like if I were, I feel like I don't know exactly who I would be, but I'm a 16-year-old. What's your plan? I am my plan. I decide who I am.
I believe in Trump.
Yeah. What do I believe? I believe that at the moment when I have to believe in something, I'll figure out what it is. It doesn't like. No, I hear you, but
this makes sense.
How the hell does that give any sense of direction for other Republicans? For people, it seems like what that's leaving. It's basically deferring to the mass of Trump's base. Let's see who comes. I can see this working out this way. Let's see who comes out of the woodwork. Let's see what politicians come into popularity under Trump. They're going to be appealing to his base. They're going to be riffing on it in different ways. You might see some new factions. I could see that being the sort of de facto state of affairs, what actually happens here. But I could see plenty of other stuff happening too. Manila, with that in mind, where do you think Trumpism, if it's undefinable, if it's unpredictable, where's it going? What's your take?
I think it is going towards further nationalism, but I wouldn't necessarily equate that with white nationalism, but nationalism for sure. Yeah. But on social matters, which I think is a good thing,
more liberal.
On social matters, they are going more liberal. The Republicans are less, super hardcore pro-life. They're less super hardcore these social issues.
That's the weird irony here. Manila, I'm sorry for jumping in again, but the weird irony here is that on the one hand, I know it. I know from family members, younger family members who are pro-Trump and broadly fall into the whole MAGA thing, they are socially liberal, but they're also belligerent when it comes to social justice issues and to woke politics, and they'll push back hard against that. So it's this weird contradiction where, depending on what you mean by the word liberal, they're both more and significantly less in their sort of reactionary readiness to just insult it, make fun of it, see it as an attempt to control them, and that whole thing. Manila, I'm sure you see that too.
I think it's great that both the two biggest parties in this country, the Democrats and the Republicans, I think it's great that there are so many kind of factioned off little sections of the Democrats, of the Republicans, and that they no longer are definable in a binary manner that we saw traditionally in the 80s and 90s in modern politics. I think modern politics has been crap for this country. If you go back 100 years, there were 5, 6, 7 popular parties where their policies were more definable. The fact that we've done this two-party system, I think, for the better part of the 20th century, has shown its failure.
Yes.
Down with it all. Let's just have everybody go off in their own little sections and have everyone duke it out. Because
I would be on board with that.
place.
But aren't they just going to vote for the politicians? Aren't they just if you lean towards the left, Jamarl? I don't know where you're going with this, but if you lean towards the left, won't the Democrats tell you effectively vote for our guy,
regardless of who that
Biden?
is? You know, it's like you can have this contest where somebody like Sanders is seemingly winning, and you end up with Biden. Vote for a guy,
right?
But I guess my thing is, I don't think it's changed. I mean, if Lindsey Graham is out saying Donald Trump is the guy forward, is Lindsey Graham really changing any of his political policies? And if not, what does it matter that Lindsey Graham is saying Trump is the one forward? Meaning, this has nothing to do with policy. This has everything to do with idol worship. When they were grabbing that golden idol of Trump, they should have just kept that and just put that in the Republican place. All of this is a profile in cowardice. That's all what this is. I don't believe for a moment that those Republicans like Trump. They hated his guts.
Yeah.
Do you honestly believe that Kevin McCarthy likes Trump? He's screaming at Trump because Trump support. McCarthy was within an inch of his life from his standpoint when those Trump supporters were banging on his window. And then he comes out a day later and says, okay, yeah, Trump is the way forward. Yeah, because the political winds, the gravity of it is just bending him into shape.
But Jamarl, we can say the same thing about Democrats who kowtow to Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton when, Madam Hillary chimes in.
Agreed.
So there are idols on both sides, and I think that's the terrible thing for American democracy.
Or right now, for example, meaning when Joe Biden is giving that speech, the eat the rich speech, as I call it. Well, does he really mean it, or is he just saying it? Like, I honestly think that until we see something different, that on both sides, we're seeing a profile in these individuals saying what they think people need to hear in order to move the direction they need to go. And so on Trump's side, you have, all right, Trump was a blue-collar billionaire. Trump was the guy that was fighting for the middle class, at least in their heads. All right, this is the direction we need to go as Republicans. And you can see the benefit of it by the financial backing, by the polling. If you go against it, you can see yourself being attacked. Look at Liz Cheney as a good example of that, being eaten alive by, a bunch of lemmings or whatever with teeth. And so you have this thing of like, it's very clear in the direction that this stuff is going. And so it's like, even on the Democrat side, when Joe Biden is giving a speech about the PRO Act, or is giving a speech and he's talking about $15 an hour minimum wage, he's not doing those things. I don't even know how they're trying to get that stuff passed, but it doesn't stop him from saying it. And the very act of saying it in and of itself gives this feeling as if they're doing something different. I guess I'm saying, isn't that true also with the Republican Party in regards to Trump stuff? You're just saying it. You're just saying, yes, Trump, we believe in Trump. No, our policies haven't changed. But yes, we totally believe in Trump. It just sounds
100%.
like words. It's ideology.
100%. That's true for both parties in this country, that people have a lot of empty words. They blow a lot of smoke, and they get up on the Hill, and all they do is try to perpetuate their job. That's why I say this two-party system has been the worst thing that's happened to modern American democracy. Look at our foreign policy with Russia and China. Both parties, that is like one voice that they're all echoing from the Hill. Both sides have horrible things to say about both countries, and that's why the relations never get better, because they might campaign, they stump on one thing, but they get up to the Hill and they go wherever the winds blow them to make sure that they maintain their job, because they like getting that paycheck and they like getting the book deals and the TV appearances and like ED endorsements or whatever.
And the Emmys. If you're Andrew Cuomo, you also get an Emmy, which that'd be cool. If I mentioned Manila, I'm going to pivot radically here because I wanted to go to something that you had actually brought up before you joined us this morning. So you brought it up. I want to make sure we get to it. The Colonial Pipeline issue. You said that you've been watching this closely and you have some thoughts for us. Again, the Colonial Pipeline, a massive pipeline bringing oil from Texas to the East Coast that has been shut down after a ransomware cyber attack. Basically, the argument is they're being held hostage, and it is being pinned on this group, ostensibly Russian cyber criminal organization named DarkSide. That's the broad overview, and it seems like it's going to be locked down throughout this week. What have you been seeing on this, Manila?
So here's the thing. Right now, this week, far right, I guess you can call him far right, Sean Hannity, who has a huge national following, right? We can't deny that. Love him or hate him. He has a huge national following. He already opened his mouth and is blaming Russia. This new group, DarkSide, the FBI says it's Eastern Europe, but they have not They have not said it's Russia. And you're right, Colonial Pipeline operates 5,500 miles of pipe from New York down to Texas. The state of emergency has been declared in Florida and Virginia. Intel officials believe that this is a criminal non-state actor, that this is extortion.
Right.
But still, it's not going to stop people on the Hill. It's not going to stop people that have national platforms like Sean Hannity from already blaming Russia. And here's why that is dangerous, is because we're a few weeks away from the official kickoff of the G7 summit in June, where their pre-meetings a few weeks ago outlined Russia and China as key targets that they want to rein them in. So if this has any ties to any Russian nationals at all, despite early intelligence already saying that it's a gang, this can really hurt the future Biden-Putin talks or relations. This shows key vulnerabilities in infrastructure with this, increase of ransomware attacks. Biden's deputy national security advisor for cyber, Ann Neuberger, she gave a horrible press conference the other day where she basically said, well, this is a private business. This is a hands-off approach. They're not, basically Colonial Pipeline is not cooperating. Believe that or not, they are not cooperating with investigators. And here's why I think there is a new rise in such a thing called cyber insurance. Have you guys heard of anything like that?
No, I haven't heard of this one, but it makes sense. But please,
yes.
Okay.
This is a rising business right now. So cyber insurance is like having car insurance, right? That's why it exists. These cyber gangs always want crypto payments because it's harder to trace or whatever, and they can make off with tons of money. The scary thing about this is that when you hear the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber saying, oh, this is hands-off or what have you, but then you compare that to how they treated the Keystone Pipeline, where they put a stop to that building. So you compare, is Keystone a private entity or is this a private-public matter? There are no federal laws in the books to compel major private companies like Colonial, who control key infrastructure in the U.S., to meet any sort of cyber standard in securing their networks. They clearly had a ton of vulnerabilities, which is why some newbie gang somewhere in Eastern Europe was able to hack into their networks. And intelligence officials say that they didn't even intend to shut down the pipeline, the distribution of gas, that they just wanted to kind of lock up basically HR networks for crypto, but they incidentally just happened to block the supply chain. Now, we have OSHA laws to protect workers, but there's no such modern-day standards for online networks. And this is a scary thing when you have a break in private entities that control this infrastructure.
Yeah, so much infrastructure. Again, if for a second, let's assume, as I think it is safe to, that this is not a state-sponsored attack, that even though they're trying to make this about Russia, wherever they're coming from, this is not done by a state. Regardless, you said that right, which would be more severe. This is just a roving cyber criminal gang in some post-cyberpunk world that we're living in. They've decided to take this company down. Those public-private partnerships and the fact that there's no obligation on the part of the company to keep their system secure makes this a public issue. But if our response to it is to use it for foreign policy purposes, I don't think we're going to learn anything from it, and I don't think our infrastructure is going to be any more secure on the other side of this. Manila, we need to close out here. But some of my thoughts in response to it. What do you think?
Oh, I'm with you 100%. If it's private, then make it private. But the fact that this is key infrastructure across the whole eastern seaboard, it is no longer a private matter. This is public infrastructure. We need to know what's going on, and they need to compel Colonial Pipeline to cooperate. Right now, we don't even know if they've paid the ransomware
attackers.
Yeah, if they paid off the ransom. Well, and this is coming after major pipeline shutdown in the United States. Obviously, Colonial Pipeline wasn't a name that everybody knew, but we're being affected by it. And if you live in the southeast United States, you certainly know what's going on if you can't get gas at the station. Mark Frost, we were just corresponding with earlier this morning, I was texting back and forth, a guest on the show. He told me he tried like half a dozen different gas stations and he couldn't get any gas due to this outage. If you think back to what happened recently with the Suez Canal, where a single ship for, about a week-long period almost was able to block a massive volume of the world's trade. Think about how those kinds of small changes, if they were orchestrated, and if you had an actor with malintent coming in trying to cause these problems, think how much of the economy you could seriously affect, whether it's oil prices, global volumes of trade. I know people, it's a little bit far afield at this point, but talking about nuclear energy, how those, along with so much of the rest of our electoral grid, are subject to huge security threats, whether it's from terrorists or from foreign nations or domestic powers, whatever the case may be. So much of this. Anyway, we got to go. Manila, I want to thank you for joining us. Great conversations this morning. Manila Chan, veteran news anchor and host of RT America's daily news program In Question. You can follow Manila on Twitter at Manila Chan, on Facebook at Manila Chan Reports, and watch her show In Question on RT America. And you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break. Coming back in our wrap segment, 202-521-1320. Again, that's 202-521-1320. Be right back, taking your calls on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays, when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
Fault Lines.
Live, and we're back from across the divided states of America, taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Again, 202-521-1320. Taking your calls. Now is the last and best chance, today at least. We've got Nate calling in from Atlanta. Nate, you are on the line. What is on your mind?
Hello. Yes, I was calling just to finish up my my last statement.
You got into Star Trek, and by the way, your connection is much better. You can just tell you're very much audible. Anyway, what were you saying, Nate?
Yes, I was using my headphones. But yes, Jamarl, you got me into Star Trek. It's amazing. I love it. Yes, you talked about it all the time on your show. And I was like, all right, let me watch this. Picard and Data are like my favorite characters. Right now I'm on season 2. I'm watching with my wife. My wife loves it too. But
you're watching Next Generation? What are you watching?
Yes, Star Trek Next Generation. That's one I'm watching right now. But Colin, because with Elon Musk and the chip inside the brain, it reminded me, like, especially if it's in the wrong hands, or even the right hands, who knows? But the two alien races that Picard came in contact with, one was the who were both infused, who became one with technology. One was it was a group of aliens that traveled in pairs of twos, who only spoke in binary, who took the ship in order to save themselves. And one was the other one where Q, who wanted to be a part of the crew, Picard didn't let him, so Q took him to the outer edge, where they found this other race of
the Borg.
Alien.
That was one of the best episodes of Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Just to give people a background, just in case they don't know, it'll be 30 seconds. Q wants to be part of the ship. Now, Q is an all-powerful being. He's basically omnipotent. From our standpoint, he's like God, but Q says, I'm not God. There are other beings out there that are more powerful than I am. But Q says, I want to be part of the ship. I want to know what it is like to be humanity and everything else. And Picard is telling this godlike being, no, we don't want you on this ship. We don't need you on this ship. And Q is like, there are dangers out there, Picard. There are dangers out there. There are things out there that you can't deal with. And he's like, whatever it is, we can deal with it. We're humanity. We can figure it out. We'll be able to figure it out. We can figure out anything. And he's like getting very strong, telling this godlike being that, no, we'll be fine. We don't need you. In which case, Q says, fine, and introduces him to the Borg. Now, the Borg nearly kills everybody on that ship. It chases the ship down on Warp 9, overwhelms their defenses, overwhelms their attacks, and basically it was going to chase them down and gobble the ship up. And Picard has the breakdown. It's like, please, Q, help, please. And he's like, a weaker man would have let the ship die as opposed to doing that. Now, that is a phenomenal episode because Picard is such a good actor. And Picard was put into this position where he had to basically accept I was wrong. I was wrong. Now, Q, who is omnipotent, you can make a case that says if it wasn't for Q introducing Picard that soon, they would have had no defenses for the Borg when they came back later. Meaning you can make a case that says Q helped Picard in that situation. Or you can make a case that says Borg would have never known that Earth existed if it wasn't for Q. Depends on how you look at it. But in that situation, yeah, Picard had to come to account and basically beg Q for help because he was screwed. It was a phenomenal episode. And Q was like, other men would have just let your crew die before being that weak.
I can see where that's going.
Yeah.
And I kind of my mind went to the critical, what does this mean? That sort of metaphorical thing. But Nate, you were making a point with this. Maybe we can come back to it. Where were you going with it?
No, it just with Elon Musk and that technology, we're becoming more and more
interactive with our technology.
Right. Where when it comes to gene stuff, or I mean, humans and technology are becoming one more and more.
What do you think of the transhumanist thing, Nate? Like this intermingling between those things. Like if Elon Musk put that on the market tomorrow, would you go and get the brain chip?
Hell no. No.
You don't want the brain chip? What if they said that your capabilities enhanced, meaning you got a didactic memory, you had perfect memory with the brain chip.
Mm-hmm.
Would you get it then?
No. I'm more of I like history, especially ancient history. I think technology is a way of trying to recreate things that we could do in the past. But I'm more of a nature guy, so I'm fine with my farm and all that. And the third, I don't need.
Nate, I'm in the same boat, but I could see myself succumbing to the temptation. I'm a dude who grew up hitchhiking, volunteering on farms, kind of a weird, slightly more alternative lifestyle. And in the long run, to that which I came from, I shall return, or something like that. I plan to get a farm and a property, but at the same time, if the price were right and the promise were high enough, I could see myself going for some sort of human augmentation. I'm also reminded a good sci-fi author that I've been getting into a little bit more recently, Ted Chiang, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, Ted, Chiang, good author, is this collection of short stories I've been reading, Exhalation. One of the stories from that, it's called The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Feeling. I would recommend checking it out. And it's an interesting story. Basically, it takes two different time periods. One, sometime in the near probable future, the other early 20th century. In the near future one, there's this technology, a reporter's doing an article on this new technology that watches, you're already recording everything with your smartphones, and in this new society, they already have cameras implanted, but it watches your technology and it creates a sort of memory index. It looks across all of your memories, and if you're struggling to recall something, like a date that you had with your loved one or what they said on, last Tuesday evening or whatever, it just basically creates an index for you to very easily search this stuff. And the journalist in this short story that he's writing is trying to look at how is this going to impact society.
Yeah.
That's on the one hand. On the other hand, in the early 20th century, say 1910s, 1920s, it's set in a small tribe in Africa from the perspective of this young boy, where a missionary, I believe it's an English missionary specifically, comes in. They don't know how to read. This missionary brings a copy of the Bible, and the kid gets interested in the Bible and starts to read through the Bible. Is learning how to read. Gets into, I'm not going to spoil it, gets into this conflict with his local community because he's learning how to read. He's learning to think in a different way, where instead of hearing a speech, he's thinking in terms of the exact specific words being said. It's a different kind of memory. Right. And what the author of the whole thing, Ted Chiang, what the sci-fi author is getting into is interesting stuff about how we learn to think with mediums, how we've already changed ourselves, and these sort of irreversible motions that we go through for better and for worse as we learn to do old things in new ways, which is what reading would be and what that other tech would be and what Neuralink would be.
Yeah.
It's a different, way of inhabiting what it means to be a human being.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. There is
questions are all there.
Humanity in the strictest sense of the term. Just like there's no society in the strictest sense. We decide moment to moment.
Well, and the weird thing about humanity is that of all the species, it is the one that seems to be the most uncertain about what exactly it is.
What it is.
To constantly be asking questions about what it means to be human, how to act, what
is the right way to do this?
Yeah, that's the self-awareness that comes with what is in our nature opens us up to a radically larger number of possible natures.
Yeah.
We can be so many different kinds of things because we're able to scrutinize ourselves and question ourselves. And I can't help but wonder if we wouldn't feel ever much more the same way if we could read our own minds and read other people's minds with Neuralink. If we had that kind of deep level of it might not be more technological or mechanical.
Radically disruptive in the beginning.
Yeah, and it might bring out, in a weird way, not something artificial or cyborg. What the terrors that we might find lurking are those that have always been there. They just have new ways of expressing themselves.
Always there, you just didn't know about it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's creepy. Like, it's creepy on the way. I mean, would you really want all your thoughts exposed to the public? Not really.
No, God, no.
No.
No,
but if you were born that way, that's different.
Yeah, would you, because then here's the other side of it. If they didn't know your thoughts, might they not distrust you? Which we all have to live with right now.
Right there, yeah.
But wouldn't, if I'm pure, I'm clean, read my thoughts, you'll know exactly who I am. There's a comfort in that that I could see being very appealing for people going through this. We need to close this one out. Interesting show. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back tomorrow morning. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Engineer Andre. Thank you, Jamarl Thomas. Thank you to our guests, our callers, and you. See you again tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., folks. Signing off, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.